I watched an alien translate the Sumerian tablets. What he revealed about our creation terrified me. Before I start, I need you to do something for me, right now. Comment where you're listening from. Your bedroom, your car, walking your dog at night, doesn't matter. Just tell me, because if this post disappears tomorrow, if my account goes dark, if I suddenly stop existing, I need to know that somebody, somewhere, heard this, that someone knows what I'm about to tell you actually happened. I'm not asking for likes or shares or any of that. I just need a witness. One person who can say, yeah, I heard Marcus Webb tell this story on November 10th, 2025, and then he vanished. That's all I'm asking. So please, just comment. Even if it's just your city. Please. My name is Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb. Well, was. I don't know what I am anymore, honestly. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Small town, big church, bigger faith. My grandmother used to drag me to East Ridge Baptist every Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday evening like clockwork. I knew every verse of Amazing Grace by the time I was 6, could recite John 3:16 before I could tie my shoes. My whole family, we weren't just Christians, you know. We were Christians, capital letters. The kind who said grace before every meal, even at McDonald's. The kind who actually read the Bible, not just kept it on the coffee table looking pretty. My grandmother, she'd tell me every night before bed, Marcus, baby, God has a plan for you, a purpose. You remember that. And I believed her. God, I believed her with everything I had. I enlisted in the Air Force right out of high school, 2007. Felt like the right thing to do, you know? Serve my country, make my family proud, see the world. Basic training at Lackland, then security forces training. I was good at it, really good. Something about the discipline, the structure, the sense of purpose. It just clicked for me. I did 3 tours, Germany first, then Kuwait, then Afghanistan. That last one, Afghanistan in 2016, that's where everything changed. Not just for me, but for everyone who was there that summer. We were stationed outside Kandahar, running convoy security. It was hot. That kind of heat that makes you feel like the air itself is trying to kill you. 118 degrees in the shade. And there was no shade. Just dust and rocks and Taliban fighters who knew that desert better than we ever would. July 23, 2016. I remember the date because it's burned into my brain like a brand. We were escorting a supply convoy through this village. I don't even remember the name anymore. Something with bad in it. Lots of places over there had bad in the name, which should have been our first clue. The locals called it a safe route. Safe is relative in Afghanistan, but we'd done it a dozen times without incident. That day was different. We spotted an IED about 50 meters ahead. Thank God our lead vehicle had good eyes. We stopped the convoy, called EOD, standard procedure. While we were waiting, some of the local kids came out. They always did. They'd beg for candy, water, whatever we'd give them. Command said don't engage, don't create relationships, stay professional. But they were kids, you know, just kids. This one little girl, couldn't have been more than 7. She had this smile that reminded me of my niece back home. Same gap in her front teeth, same way of tilting her head when she was trying to be cute. She came up to my vehicle. I was pulled security on the turret, and she just looked up at me with these big brown eyes and said something in Pashto I didn't understand. But then she said in broken English, "Water, please?" And I looked around, made sure none of the officers were watching, and I tossed her my canteen. Not the issued one, my personal one that I'd brought from home. It had a little cross charm hanging from the strap that my grandmother gave me. The little girl caught it, smiled so wide, and ran back toward the buildings. I remember thinking, that's fine. She needs it more than I do. I remember feeling good about it, like maybe I'd done something right in this God-forsaken place. EOD was still working on the IED when the second one went off. The one we didn't see. It was buried in the building wall, 20 meters from where that little girl had been standing. I don't know if she triggered it, or if it was remote detonated, or if it was just terrible timing, but I saw it. I saw the flash, heard the boom that made my ears ring for 3 days straight, and when the dust cleared, there were pieces of things that used to be children scattered across that dirt road. My canteen was laying there in the rubble, the cross charm still attached, covered in blood. That wasn't mine. The little girl, I found her shoe, just her shoe, pink with purple flowers. That's all that was left that I could identify. We called in medevac, but there was nothing to evacuate. 5 local kids died instantly. 3 more died before we could get them to the hospital. The Taliban claimed responsibility, said it was targeting us, that the children were acceptable losses in their holy war. Acceptable losses. I stood there in that village, looking at that pink shoe, and something inside me just broke, shattered, like glass hitting concrete. Because what kind of God allows that? What kind of divine plan includes blowing up a 7-year-old girl who just wanted water? My grandmother's voice kept echoing in my head. God has a plan for you, baby. A purpose. What was the purpose of that little girl dying? What was the plan there? I couldn't make it make sense. That night, back at the FOB, I went to the chapel. We had this little plywood building that the chaplain held services in. I sat in the back row staring at the cross on the wall, and I waited. I waited for God to explain, to give me some sign, some comfort, some reason, anything. The chaplain came over, tried to talk to me, said something about God's mysterious ways, about how we can't understand his plan, but we have to trust. Trust. Trust in what? Trust in a God who watches children get vaporized and does nothing? I walked out, didn't say a word, just walked out, and I never prayed again. Not once. Not when I got home. Not at my grandmother's funeral 2 years later. Not at my sister's wedding. Not ever. Because as far as I was concerned, God died in that village in Afghanistan. Or maybe he was never there to begin with. I spent the next 3 years just existing, going through the motions. I was good at my job, got promoted to staff sergeant, kept my head down and my mouth shut. But inside, empty, hollow, like someone had scooped out everything that made me who I was and left just the uniform. My family kept trying to get me back to church. You just need to reconnect with the Lord, Marcus. Prayer will heal your heart, baby. I'd smile, nod, change the subject. How do you tell your grandmother that you think everything she believes is a lie? That you think we're just meat and electricity stumbling around this rock until we stop? You don't. You just smile and change the subject. Then in August 2019, I got orders. Not normal orders, weird orders. Report to Nellis Air Force Base. Special assignment, security clearance upgrade required. No other details. No unit information, no duration, no nothing. Just report to Nellis and await further instruction. I had a top-secret clearance already from my convoy work, but this was something else. They flew me to Vegas, put me in a van with blacked-out windows, and drove for what felt like hours. Made me sign 47 different non-disclosure agreements. 47, each one more terrifying than the last. The last one basically said, if you speak about what you see here to anyone, including lawyers, family members, priests, or therapists, you will not be charged with a crime. You will simply cease to exist. Those were the actual words. Cease to exist. Not be imprisoned or face court-martial. Cease to exist. That's when I knew. Wherever they were taking me, it wasn't on any official map. When they finally took the hood off my head, yeah, they hooded me for the last part of the drive. I was standing in an elevator, going down. The display didn't show floor numbers. It showed levels. B1, B2, B3. It stopped at B7, basement level 7. We were so far underground I could feel the pressure in my ears. The doors opened, and there was this hallway that looked like every government facility you've ever seen in a movie. Fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, cinder block walls painted that specific shade of beige that screams, "Your tax dollars at work." There was a sign on the wall with an arrow, Sector 7, Non-Conventional Archaeology Division. Non-conventional archaeology. I remember thinking, what the hell is conventional archaeology doing in a military base 7 floors underground? I was about to find out, and I was about to learn that losing my faith in Afghanistan, that was just preparing me for something so much bigger, something that would make me question not just God, but everything I thought I knew about where we came from and why we're here. So there I was, standing in this hallway 7 floors underground, staring at a sign that said, Non-Conventional Archaeology Division, and my escort. This guy in a black suit who hadn't said a single word to me during the entire trip. He just pointed down the hallway and said, "End of the hall, last door on the right. Dr. Chen is expecting you." That was it. No briefing, no explanation, no, "Welcome to your new assignment." Just, "End of the hall," and then he walked away. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds trying to decide if I could just leave, just turn around, get back in that elevator and pretend this never happened. But those 47 NDAs I'd signed kept flashing through my mind, especially that last one, cease to exist. You don't put that in a legal document unless you mean it. So I started walking. The hallway was longer than it looked. Had to be at least 200 feet. And the weird thing, it was completely silent down there, like unnaturally silent. No hum of air conditioning, no distant voices, no footsteps except mine. Just this heavy, dead silence that made my ears ring. The doors I passed had these little placards next to them. Biological Analysis Lab 3. Metallurgy Testing Chamber. Linguistic Database Archive. Every door had a keycard reader and what looked like a retinal scanner. This wasn't some storage facility. This was active research. But research on what? I got to the end of the hall and there it was. The last door on the right. The placard read, Sector 7A, Non-Conventional Archaeology. Senior Researcher, Dr. Sarah Chen. There was a small window in the door that reinforced glass with the wire mesh inside it, but I couldn't see much through it. Just bright fluorescent light and what looked like work tables. I knocked. Didn't know if I was supposed to, but it felt wrong to just barge in. For about 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps and the door opened. The woman standing there looked like she hadn't slept in a month. Seriously. Dark circles under her eyes so deep they looked like bruises. Hair pulled back in a messy bun with a pencil stuck through it. She was maybe 40, Asian, wearing a white lab coat over a t-shirt that said, I'm silently correcting your grammar. She looked me up and down, taking in my uniform, and then just sighed. Long, exhausted sigh. You must be Webb, she said. Her voice had this flat quality to it, like someone who'd explained the same thing too many times. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, yes ma'am, I said. Security forces just transferred from... She held up a hand. I know. I read your file. Come in. I stepped into the room and... Okay, imagine every archaeological lab you've ever seen on TV. Now make it weird. There were work tables covered with artifacts, but not like pottery and arrowheads. These were fragments of things that looked ancient, but also wrong somehow. Pieces of metal that had this iridescent sheen to them, like oil on water. Stone tablets with writing I'd never seen before. What looked like circuit boards, but made of some kind of crystalline material. And at the far end of the room, there was this massive glass wall. Not a window, but like floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass, at least 3 inches thick. I couldn't see what was on the other side because there was a curtain drawn across it. A curtain, in a secure underground facility. Dr. Chen closed the door behind me and locked it. Actually locked it. Sit down, Webb, she said, gesturing to a rolling chair near one of the work tables. We need to talk before I show you why you're here. I sat. She pulled up another chair and sat across from me, rubbing her eyes. How much did they tell you? She asked. Nothing, ma'am, I said. Just that I was being reassigned to special duty, security detail. She laughed. Not a happy laugh. A bitter, exhausted laugh. Security detail. That's what they're calling it now. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Okay, Webb, here's the situation. You're the 4th guard I've had this year. 4th. You know what happened to the other 3? I shook my head. First one lasted 3 months, then had a complete nervous breakdown. They found him in his quarters at 2 a.m., rocking back and forth, muttering about the eyes. The eyes. He's at a psychiatric facility now. Still there, actually. They don't think he's coming back. She paused, watching my reaction. I kept my face neutral. Second one tried to take pictures. With his phone. Stupid move. He was reassigned within an hour. I don't know where. Nobody does. And the third one, she trailed off, looking at her hands. Third one just asked for a transfer after 2 weeks. Wouldn't say why. Just kept saying he couldn't do it. He had a family. He couldn't be here. They granted it because, well, better a voluntary transfer than another breakdown. Ma'am, I said carefully, what exactly am I guarding? Dr. Chen stood up and walked to the glass wall. I'm a linguist, Webb. PhD from Stanford. Specialization in dead languages. Sumerian, Akkadian, Ancient Egyptian, Sanskrit. I've spent 20 years translating texts that most people don't even know exist. I thought I'd seen it all. Translated everything there was to translate. She pulled a cord, and the curtain slid back. Then they brought me here and introduced me to the professor, the room on the other side of the glass. I couldn't process it at first. My brain just refused. It was set up like a combination between a laboratory and a prison cell. Surgical lights overhead. Medical equipment along one wall. A toilet in the corner. No privacy screen. A bed, sort of a bed, more like a metal platform with some padding on it. And in the center of the room, hunched over a work table of his own, was something that wasn't human. I want to be really clear about what I saw, because every time I tell this story to myself, late at night when I can't sleep. I question whether it was real, whether I imagined it, whether I had a breakdown like guard number 1 and this is all some kind of delusion. But no, it was real. I saw it. The thing at the table, the professor, he was tall, really tall. If he stood up straight, I'd guess maybe 8 feet, but he was hunched over, so it was hard to tell. His skin wasn't gray like the stereotypical aliens in movies. It was more silvery, like pewter, and it had this texture, almost like dolphin skin, smooth, but not quite. He was thin, emaciated thin, like someone who'd been starving for years. His arms were too long, ending in hands with 3 fingers each, long fingers, like spider legs. He was wearing something that might have been clothing, but it was hard to tell where the clothing ended and the skin began. Some kind of dark blue suit, or maybe it was just his natural coloring. And his head, Jesus, his head was what got me. It was disproportionately large, elongated toward the back, and completely hairless. But the worst part, the part that made my stomach drop, were the eyes. Have you ever looked at a shark's eye? That dead, black, emotionless eye that looks through you instead of at you? Imagine that, but bigger, so much bigger. These eyes took up almost a quarter of his face. Completely black, no white, no iris, no pupil, just black, deep black, black like staring into a well at midnight. And even though he wasn't looking at me, even though he was focused on whatever he was working on at his table, I felt seen. I felt exposed. Like every secret I'd ever kept was suddenly written on my forehead in neon letters. I stood up so fast my chair rolled backwards and hit the wall. "What the fuck is that?" I said. Forgot I was talking to an officer. Forgot everything except the primal lizard brain panic that was screaming at me to run. Dr. Chen didn't even blink at my language. "That," she said quietly, "is what the government has been hiding at Area 51 since 1989. His ship crashed in the Nevada desert. He survived. He's been here ever since. That's..." I couldn't get words out. "That's an alien. That's a fucking alien." "Yes," Dr. Chen said. "We call him the professor because he teaches us, cooperates, voluntarily." "Voluntarily?" I turned to look at her. "He's in a cell. It's complicated," she said. "He made a deal. He translates artifacts for us, ancient artifacts that we've recovered from archaeological sites around the world. And in exchange," she hesitated, "in exchange, we let him send signals home. Or try to. We don't know if anyone's receiving them. We don't know if there's anyone left to receive them. But he keeps trying." I looked back at the professor. He was still hunched over his work, these long fingers moving with surprising delicacy over what looked like a clay tablet. "What is he translating?" I asked. Dr. Chen walked closer to the glass. "Sumerian tablets, recovered from Iraq in 2016, right before ISIS could destroy them. They're from the ancient city of Ur, dated to approximately 2600 BCE. They're part of the Anunnaki texts." "The what?" "Anunnaki," she repeated. "Ancient Mesopotamian deities. Gods who supposedly came from the sky and created humanity. Most scholars think it's mythology, creation myths, stories primitive people told themselves to explain where they came from." She turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes that scared me more than the creature behind the glass. It was fear, real, genuine fear. "But the professor, he says it's not mythology. He says the Anunnaki were real, and he says this tablet," she pointed at what he was working on. "This specific tablet describes something that his people have been searching for across the universe for 50,000 years. Something they've never been able to explain or understand. Something that terrifies them." I stared at that creature, that alien, that professor, hunched over a clay tablet that was older than the Bible. And I felt something I hadn't felt since that day in Afghanistan. That same sinking feeling. That same sense that the universe was bigger and colder and more indifferent than I'd ever imagined. "Ma'am," I said quietly, "what's on that tablet?" Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "It's about how humans were created, Webb. The real story. Not Adam and Eve. Not evolution. The truth. And according to the professor, once you know the truth," she trailed off, staring at the glass. "Once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. It changes everything. Your worldview, your beliefs, your understanding of what it means to be human." She looked at me. "Guard number 3, the one who requested a transfer? You want to know what he told me before he left? He said, 'Dr. Chen, I have 3 kids at home. I go to church every Sunday with my wife, and if I stay here one more day and hear one more word of what that thing is translating, I'll never be able to look my children in the eye again and tell them that God loves them. That's what he said, word for word. My mouth went dry. Ma'am, what does that mean? Dr. Chen looked back at the professor. It means your job, Staff Sergeant Webb, isn't just to guard this room and make sure the professor doesn't escape. Your job is to watch him translate those tablets, to witness what he reveals, and to somehow maintain your psychological stability while everything you thought you knew about human existence gets systematically dismantled. Think you can do that? I should have said no. I should have requested that transfer right then and there. Should have told her I had a family too, even though I didn't. Should have made up any excuse to get out of that room and back to the surface where things made sense. But I didn't. You know why? Because I'd already lost my faith. Already stopped believing in God or purpose or divine plans. So what did I have to lose? What could this thing possibly tell me that would be worse than watching a child die for no reason in a desert on the other side of the world? Yes, ma'am, I heard myself say. I can do that. Dr. Chen looked at me with something that might have been pity. We'll see, Webb. We'll see. She pulled the curtain closed again, but it didn't matter. I could still feel those black eyes. Even through the curtain, through the glass, through the walls. I could feel them, watching, waiting, knowing something that I didn't. And somehow I knew. My life was about to change in ways I couldn't even begin to imagine. My first official day started at 600 hours. Dr. Chen met me outside Sector 7A with a coffee in one hand and a tablet computer in the other. She looked like she'd actually slept, which was an improvement from the day before, but those dark circles weren't going anywhere. "Morning, Webb," she said, handing me the tablet. "This is your orientation packet. Read it, memorize it, then we'll burn it, because none of this can leave this facility." I took the tablet and started scrolling. It was like reading science fiction, except it was labeled as official documentation. Subject designation, NHI 7, Non-Human Intelligence, Unit 7. Common name among staff, the professor. Origin, unknown, presumed extraterrestrial. Recovered, September 1989, Nevada desert, 47 miles northwest of Groom Lake facility. Status, cooperative detainee. Threat level, undetermined. Physical capabilities, unknown. Mental capabilities, extreme. That last part made me stop. Extreme mental capabilities, what does that mean? Dr. Chen sipped her coffee. It means he's smart, Webb. Smarter than any human who's ever lived. We've tested him. His pattern recognition is off the charts. He learned English in 6 weeks, not basic English. Fluent, academic-level English. He can read and write in 23 human languages now. And that's just what we've taught him. God knows what he knew before. How do you teach something like that? I asked. Dr. Chen smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. You don't. You just expose him to the information and he absorbs it, like a sponge. Actually, that's not accurate. A sponge absorbs passively. He analyzes, cross-references, synthesizes. I showed him a Sumerian grammar textbook once, just as a test. He read it in 40 minutes and then corrected 3 errors that scholars have been debating for decades. He was right on all 3. We checked. She took the tablet back from me. That's what you need to understand about the Professor, Webb. He's not just intelligent. He's functionally omniscient when it comes to certain domains. Language, mathematics, physics. He understands things about our universe that we're centuries away from figuring out, maybe millennia. So why is he translating ancient tablets? I asked. If he's that smart, why isn't he, I don't know, curing cancer or solving climate change? Dr. Chen's expression darkened. Because that's not the deal. The deal is very specific. He translates archaeological artifacts that we provide, and in exchange we allow him to send signals into space. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. What kind of signals? She shrugged. We don't know. He built the transmitter himself out of parts we gave him. It broadcasts on frequencies we can barely detect, let alone understand. For all we know, he's sending his grocery list. Or maybe he's calling for help. Or maybe, she paused, maybe he's just screaming into the void, hoping someone answers. We've been monitoring those signals for 36 years. Nothing has ever responded. That hit me harder than I expected. The image of this impossibly intelligent being, trapped underground, sending messages into space that no one answers. It was almost sad, almost human. Does he know no one's responding? I asked. Dr. Chen looked at me with something that might have been respect. That's a good question, Webb. Yes, he knows. We told him years ago. And you know what he said? I shook my head. He said, I know, I've always known, but I have to try, because the alternative is accepting that I'm the last one, and I'm not ready to accept that yet. She finished her coffee and crushed the cup in her hand. Come on, it's time for you to meet him properly. The observation room was smaller than I remembered from the day before, or maybe it just felt smaller, knowing what was on the other side of that glass. Dr. Chen sat down at a control panel that looked like it belonged in a recording studio. Switches, buttons, a microphone on an articulated arm. This is how we communicate with him, she explained. The glass is soundproof. We use the intercom system. He can't hear us unless we activate it, but she tapped a screen that showed various readouts. Heart rate, brain activity, temperature. He always knows when someone's watching. Don't ask me how. He just knows. She pressed a button, and the curtain on the glass slid back. The professor was exactly where he'd been the day before, hunched over that work table, those long fingers moving across the surface of a clay tablet. Today, I could see more details. He had tools, delicate instruments that looked like they were designed for microsurgery, a magnifying lens on an adjustable arm, reference books stacked beside him, their spines showing titles in languages I couldn't read, and the tablet itself. Even from here, I could see the writing on it. Cuneiform, wedge-shaped impressions in clay, thousands of them covering every inch of the surface. Dr. Chen leaned toward the microphone. Good morning, Professor. The effect was immediate. He didn't jump or startle, but his hands stopped moving. Slowly, with deliberate care, he set down the tool he was holding. Then he turned to face the glass. And those eyes. God, those eyes. They locked onto me even though I knew he couldn't possibly see me through the one-way glass. But he could. I knew he could. It wasn't sight in the normal sense. It was something else. Awareness. Perception. Like he was reading me the same way he read those tablets. Dr. Chen continued. This is Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb. He'll be your security escort for the foreseeable future. He's been briefed on protocols. Do you have any questions for him? For a long moment, the professor didn't move, didn't respond, just stared at the glass with those bottomless black eyes. Then he spoke, and I heard his voice for the second time. It came through speakers in the observation room, but I could tell it was being filtered somehow, made more human, because what came through still didn't sound quite right, like someone had synthesized a human voice but got the harmonics slightly wrong. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, the professor said slowly, testing each syllable. Age 34, born Chattanooga, Tennessee, 12 years military service, 3 tours of deployment, Purple Heart recipient for injuries sustained in Kandahar Province, 2016. He paused. Baptist upbringing. Lapsed. Crisis of faith following death of Afghan child, female, approximately 7 years old, July 23, 2016. Stopped attending religious services. Stopped praying. Ceased belief in Christian God or any interventionist deity. I felt my blood turn to ice. Dr. Chen had said he was smart, but this was something else. How the fuck does he know that? I whispered. Dr. Chen didn't look surprised. Your file, she said simply. He has access to personnel files for anyone assigned to this sector. Security protocol. But Webb, he didn't just read your file. He analyzed it, drew conclusions. That bit about the crisis of faith, that's not in any official document. He inferred it from your service record, your medical history, your psychological evaluations. The professor tilted his head, that gesture that birds do when they're examining something. Is my assessment incorrect, Staff Sergeant Webb? Dr. Chen looked at me, waiting. I realized she'd activated the two-way communication. He could hear me now. My mouth was dry, but I managed to speak. No, it's accurate. The professor made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. Hard to tell. Interesting, he said. You have lost your faith, yet you continue to serve. You have concluded that existence is purposeless, yet you maintain discipline and structure. You have decided that death is final and meaningless, yet you chose a profession that regularly confronts mortality. This is paradoxical behavior. It's called doing your job, I said, feeling defensive for reasons I couldn't explain. Even if you don't believe in anything, you still have responsibilities. Responsibilities to whom? The professor asked. If there is no God, no higher purpose, no cosmic significance to human existence, then responsibilities are merely social constructs, arbitrary agreements between temporary configurations of matter. Why honor them? I didn't have an answer for that. The professor seemed to sense my discomfort. He turned back to his work table. I am not criticizing, Staff Sergeant. I am trying to understand. Your species is paradoxical in many ways. It is part of what makes you fascinating. Dr. Chen leaned forward. Professor, can you give us a status update on the current translation? The professor picked up the clay tablet he'd been working on, held it carefully like it was made of something more precious than clay. This tablet is from the Temple of Enki in Eridu, dated to approximately 2600 BCE, though the text suggests it may be a copy of something much older. It is part of what your scholars call the Atrahasis epic, the story of human creation. He paused. Your scholars have mistranslated significant portions. They believe it to be metaphorical mythology. They are incorrect. Incorrect how? Dr. Chen asked. I could hear the hunger in her voice. This was why she was here. This was what kept her coming back despite the exhaustion, despite the fear, the promise of truth, real truth. The professor ran his long fingers over the cuneiform text. The Anunnaki were not gods, Dr. Chen. They were observers, watchers. They came to Earth not as creators, but as witnesses to something they did not understand, something that terrified them. Witnesses to what? Dr. Chen pressed. The professor was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, softer, almost reverent, to the moment when clay became conscious, when matter became mind, when the chemical processes in primate brains suddenly, impossibly developed self-awareness. He looked up at the glass again. Your Bible calls it the breath of life. The Sumerians called it the Me, the divine essence. My people call it something that does not translate into human language. But all of our civilizations, across all of space and time, have encountered the same phenomenon. And none of us have ever been able to explain it. The room felt colder suddenly. Or maybe it was just me. What are you saying? I asked. Are you saying humans weren't created by evolution? The professor's head tilted again. Evolution explains physical development, Staff Sergeant. It explains how your bodies adapted over millions of years. But it does not explain consciousness. It does not explain why you are aware that you are aware, why you ponder your own existence, why you create art and music and religion, why you ask why instead of simply existing. He set the tablet down carefully. 200,000 years ago, something happened to Homo sapiens. Your brains had been evolving for millions of years, slowly increasing in size and complexity, and then ignition. Sudden, explosive development of abstract thought, symbolic reasoning, self-awareness, not gradual, not evolutionary, instantaneous, on geological timescales. The Anunnaki were here, he continued. They were observing your planet as they observed many planets, and they witnessed this event. They documented it, and they were terrified because they recognized it. Recognized it from where? Dr. Chen asked. The professor looked at her with those depthless black eyes. From their own history, from the moment when their species experienced the same transformation, and from the 127 other civilizations they had encountered across the stars, all of whom had their own versions of the same story. The moment when we stopped being animals and became something else. The silence in that observation room was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. You're saying, I said slowly, that this transformation, it happened to your species too? Yes, the professor said simply. 50,000 of your years ago. We were not always as we are now. Once, we were like you, curious, afraid, trying to understand our place in the universe. And then the transformation occurred. We became aware, truly aware. And in that awareness, we found no answers, only more questions. He turned back to the tablet. The Anunnaki documented 27 separate instances of what they called divine intervention on Earth. Moments when humanity should have gone extinct but didn't. When you should have failed but succeeded. When the mathematical probability of your survival was effectively zero, yet you survived. They attributed it to something they called the watchful force, a presence they could not detect or measure, but whose effects they could observe. Dr. Chen was typing frantically on her laptop, recording every word. What did they think this watchful force was? The professor was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible through the speakers. They believed it was the same force that caused the transformation, the same presence that ignited consciousness across the universe. They believed, he paused, they believed it was God. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. Wait, you're telling me that ancient aliens believed in God? The professor turned to face me again. I am telling you, Staff Sergeant Webb, that species far more advanced than humans, with technology you would consider magical, with scientific knowledge spanning 50,000 years, when confronted with the mystery of consciousness, with the impossibility of self-awareness arising from dead matter, they concluded that there must be something beyond the physical, something that cannot be measured or quantified or understood through science alone. He moved closer to the glass, closer than I'd seen him come before. I could see details now that I'd missed. The way his skin seemed to shimmer slightly in the light. The way his eyes weren't just black but seemed to contain depth, like looking into space itself. Your faith died in Afghanistan, Marcus Webb. You watched a child die and concluded that God does not exist. That conclusion is logical given your limited perspective. But I have traveled between stars. I have studied civilizations that existed when your species was still learning to make fire. I have seen things that would break your understanding of reality. He placed one long, three-fingered hand against the glass. And I tell you this, the absence of intervention is not proof of absence. The existence of suffering is not proof of indifference. There are patterns in the universe that science cannot explain. Coincidences that occur with such regularity that they cease to be coincidences. And consciousness is the greatest miracle of all. Dr. Chen stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Professor, are you saying that this tablet proves God exists? The professor pulled his hand away from the glass. I am saying that this tablet documents what the Anunnaki believed, and what they believed is remarkably consistent with what 128 other spacefaring civilizations have independently concluded. That we are not accidents, that consciousness is not a byproduct of chemistry, that there is someone who watches. He returned to his work table, picked up his tools. But belief is not proof, Dr. Chen. I cannot give you proof. I can only give you data, information, patterns. What you do with that information, what conclusions you draw, that is beyond my capacity to determine. The intercom clicked off. Dr. Chen stood there, staring at the professor through the glass, her hand shaking slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. It was empty. She looked at it like she'd forgotten it existed. Every time, she whispered. Every single time I think I understand what he's saying. He says something that flips everything upside down. I couldn't take my eyes off the professor. He was back to work, those delicate fingers tracing the cuneiform text, completely focused. Like he hadn't just casually suggested that 128 alien civilizations all independently concluded that God might be real. Dr. Chen, I said quietly, what happened to guard number 3, the one who requested a transfer? What specifically did he hear that made him leave? She looked at me and I saw fear in her eyes again. Real, genuine fear. He was here the day the professor finished translating the creation sequence. The part of the tablets that describes how the Anunnaki witnessed the breath of life being given to humans. The professor explained it in detail, the scientific impossibility of it, the violation of every known physical law, the way consciousness appeared where there should have been only chemical reactions. She wrapped her arms around herself, and then the professor looked right at him through this glass, and said, "Your ancestors called it the breath of God. The Anunnaki called it the touch of the infinite. My people call it the ignition, but regardless of what we call it, the truth remains. Someone or something reached into the fabric of reality and changed you, made you aware, gave you souls." She paused. Then he asked, "Does that comfort you or terrify you?" Guard number 3 walked out that day and never came back. I stood there, processing that, feeling the weight of it settle over me like a blanket. For 3 years I'd been sure, absolutely certain. God was a lie. Faith was delusion. We were just meat and electricity stumbling around until we stopped. And now this thing, this being from the stars, was telling me that maybe I'd been wrong. Not because he had proof, but because even beings far more advanced than us, beings who could cross the stars, beings who'd been around for 50,000 years, even they couldn't explain consciousness without invoking something beyond science. Something that looked a lot like God. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those eyes, not in a nightmare way, more like they'd burned themselves into my retinas. I'd stare at the ceiling of my quarters and see them staring back, black, infinite, knowing. Around 0300 hours, I gave up trying and went to the gym. Area 51, or whatever this place really was. It had everything. Full gym, cafeteria that was open 24/7, even a small theater. all underground, all staffed by people who'd signed the same NDAs I had. People who couldn't talk about what they did, couldn't tell their families where they worked, couldn't even acknowledge that this place existed. I ran on the treadmill for an hour, trying to exhaust myself enough to sleep. It didn't work. My mind kept circling back to what the professor had said. Someone reached into reality and changed you, gave you souls. Souls. I hadn't thought about souls since Afghanistan, since that little girl's shoe lying in the dust. If souls were real, where did hers go? If consciousness wasn't just brain chemistry, if there was really something more, then where was she now? Was she somewhere? Or was the professor wrong? Was this all just another lie, another story we tell ourselves to make death less terrifying? When I got back to my quarters, there was a message on my tablet from Dr. Chen, timestamp, 0347 hours. Webb, can't sleep either. Come to Sector 7A. Something you need to see. SC. I should have ignored it. Should have taken a sleeping pill and crashed for a few hours. But I didn't. I got dressed, headed back down to level B7, and used my new key card to access the sector. The hallway was even more unsettling at night. The fluorescent lights had been dimmed, casting everything in this sickly yellow-green glow. My footsteps echoed weirdly, like the sound was bouncing off walls that weren't there. When I reached the lab, Dr. Chen was at her desk, surrounded by papers and open books. She looked up when I entered, and I swear she looked 10 years older than she had that morning. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "No, ma'am," I said. "You?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I haven't slept properly in 3 years, Webb. Not since I started working with him. Every time I close my eyes, I see cuneiform, thousands of wedge-shaped symbols, all rearranging themselves into patterns I can't quite understand." She gestured to a chair. "Sit. I want to show you something." She pulled up a file on her computer and turned the screen toward me. It was a photograph of a clay tablet, but not one I'd seen before. The cuneiform was dense, covering every inch of the surface. "This is from the same collection as the tablet he's working on now," Dr. Chen explained. "Recovered from in 2016, but this one I translated myself before we gave it to the professor. Took me 8 months. I'm considered one of the world's leading experts on Sumerian, and it took me 8 months." She pulled up another file. "The professor translated it in 6 hours, and his translation was different from mine. Not slightly different, fundamentally different." "How different?" I asked. She leaned back in her chair. "My translation read like mythology. Gods descending from heaven, creating humans to serve them. The usual ancient creation myth stuff. Standard interpretation. Every scholar in the field would have agreed with my translation." She paused. "The professor's translation, he found layers I didn't even know existed. Double meanings. Wordplay that only works if you understand not just Sumerian, but also the cultural context, the astronomical references, the mathematical encoding hidden in the text. His translation reads like a scientific paper." "What did it say?" I asked. "In his translation?" Dr. Chen pulled out a printed document. Her hand shook slightly as she handed it to me. "Read the first paragraph." I looked down at the paper. The professor's handwriting was immaculate, each letter perfectly formed, almost mechanical. It read, "In the time before time was measured, when the Anunnaki first arrived at the Blue World, they found the two-legged creatures in a state of partial awareness. These creatures used tools, created fire, communicated in rudimentary ways, but they were not yet awake. The Anunnaki observed them for 1,247 cycles of seasons, documenting their behavior, comparing them to similar species observed on 17 other worlds. The two-legged creatures showed promise but lacked the spark. They were sophisticated animals, nothing more." I looked up at Dr. Chen. "Okay, so the Anunnaki were studying early humans. That doesn't sound that different from your translation." "Keep reading," she said. "Next paragraph." I continued. "In the 1248th cycle, the event occurred. The Anunnaki scholars have no explanation that satisfies their scientific protocols. Observation stations across the Blue World reported the same phenomenon simultaneously. The two-legged creatures began asking, why? Not why in the practical sense of cause and effect. Why in the existential sense. Why do we exist? Why do we die? Why is there something rather than nothing? This change was not gradual. According to Anunnaki chronology, it occurred within a span of 3 generations. Genetically, the creatures had not changed. Their brains were the same size, the same structure. the same chemical composition, yet they were fundamentally different. They were aware of being aware. The Anunnaki term for this moment is Zai.Gal, the Great Breath. They could not explain it. They can still not explain it. In their 12,000 years of observing biological life across 94 planetary systems, they had never witnessed consciousness emerge so rapidly from unconsciousness. It violated their understanding of natural law. My hands were shaking now. Dr. Chen, is he saying that consciousness just appeared out of nowhere? That's exactly what he's saying, she replied. And before you ask, yes, I've checked his translation against every linguistic database we have. It's accurate. This is what the text actually says. But that's impossible, I said. Evolution doesn't work that way. You can't just suddenly become self-aware in 3 generations. It takes millions of years for that kind of cognitive leap. Dr. Chen smiled sadly. Now you understand why I can't sleep, Webb. Because you're right. It is impossible. According to everything we know about biology, neuroscience, evolution, what this text describes cannot happen. And yet, she gestured toward the observation room, where the professor was still visible through the glass, still working despite the hour. He insists it happened, not just here on Earth, but on his world too. And on 127 other worlds, all the same pattern. Species evolves normally for millions of years, developing larger brains, better tools, more complex behavior, and then ignition. Sudden, inexplicable consciousness, awareness of self, awareness of mortality, the ability to contemplate abstract concepts like justice, beauty, love, God. I set the paper down on her desk. What does he think causes it? The professor, I mean. What's his theory? Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. He doesn't have a theory, Webb. That's what terrifies him. His species has been studying this phenomenon for 50,000 years. They've developed technology that can manipulate space-time, create energy from quantum fluctuations, communicate faster than light. They've mapped the cosmic web, catalogued billions of planets, decoded the mathematics of reality itself, and they cannot explain consciousness. They cannot create it, cannot replicate it, cannot even adequately define it. She stood up and walked to the observation window. I followed. The professor was holding a magnifying glass over a section of the tablet, making notes in a leather-bound journal with that precise mechanical handwriting. 6 months ago, Dr. Chen said. I asked him directly. I said, Professor, what is consciousness? Where does it come from? You know what he told me? I shook my head. He said, Dr. Chen, if I could answer that question, my people would not have spent 50 millennia searching. We would not have crossed the galaxy studying primitive worlds. We would not have built temples and monuments in sacred spaces trying to honor the mystery. We would not have developed 3,000 different philosophical systems attempting to explain the unexplainable. The fact that I am here, in this cell, translating the observations of another species who also could not explain it, that should tell you everything you need to know about how profound this mystery is. She turned to look at me. Then he said something that I think about every single day. He said, Your species calls it the breath of God. Perhaps you are more correct than you realize. The intercom on the wall suddenly crackled to life. Neither of us had touched it. The professor's voice came through, that synthesized yet wrong quality, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Dr. Chen, Staff Sergeant Webb, I am aware you are observing. I am aware you cannot sleep. I am aware that my words have disturbed you. Chen grabbed the microphone. Professor, it's late. You should rest. I do not require rest in the way you understand it, he replied. My physiology is different. What you interpret as sleep is, for me, a meditative state that I enter for approximately 47 minutes every 62 hours. I am not due for another cycle for some time. He set down his tools and turned to face the glass. Even though it was one way, even though he couldn't possibly see us, his eyes found us, found me. Staff Sergeant Webb, you are questioning whether I am deceiving you, whether this is an elaborate manipulation, whether I am telling you what you want to hear to achieve some hidden objective. These are logical concerns. I grabbed the microphone from Dr. Chen. Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I'm thinking. How do I know any of this is real? How do I know you're not just making it all up? The professor tilted his head in that bird-like way. You do not know, Marcus Webb. You cannot know. Just as you cannot know whether your perception of reality is accurate, whether your memories are genuine, whether your consciousness is truly yours, or a sophisticated illusion generated by electrochemical processes. Certainty is impossible. All you can do is evaluate probability. Okay, I said, feeling my frustration build. Then tell me this. If your people are so advanced, if you've been studying consciousness for 50,000 years, why can't you just, I don't know, scan a brain and figure out where consciousness comes from? The professor was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, softer, almost sad. We have scanned brains, Marcus Webb, millions of them, across dozens of species. Human brains, my people's brains, the brains of every conscious species we have encountered. We can map every neuron, every synapse, every electrochemical impulse. We can predict behavior with 94.7% accuracy based on brain activity alone. We can identify the neural correlates of every thought, every emotion, every memory. He paused. But we cannot find the observer. We can see the brain processing information, but we cannot locate the entity that is experiencing that information. It is as if consciousness is not located in space-time as we understand it. It is somewhere else, observing through the brain but not originating from it. I felt cold suddenly, really cold. That's not possible. Consciousness has to be in the brain. It has to be. Otherwise, you're talking about souls, the professor finished. Yes, I am talking about souls, the non-physical component of conscious beings that somehow interfaces with physical matter but is not reducible to it. Your religious traditions have understood this for thousands of years. My people resisted this conclusion for millennia, convinced that scientific advancement would eventually explain it. We were wrong. Dr. Chen had gone pale. Professor, are you telling us that your people, a scientifically advanced spacefaring civilization, believes in souls? Belief is irrelevant, Dr. Chen, the professor replied. Data is what matters, and the data suggests that consciousness cannot be explained through materialism alone. There is something else, something that enters biological systems at a specific point in their development and transforms them from sophisticated organic machines into self-aware beings. We do not know what this something is. We do not know where it comes from. We do not know why it occurs. We only know that it does. He picked up the tablet he'd been working on. The Anunnaki witnessed this event on Earth. They documented it meticulously because they hoped desperately that by observing it happen in real time, they might finally understand it. They failed, just as we have failed, just as I suspect every conscious species in the universe has failed. Because perhaps, he paused, and I could swear I saw something like emotion in those black eyes. Perhaps it is not meant to be understood. Perhaps the mystery itself is the point. Perhaps consciousness is the signature of something greater than physical reality, something that science will never fully explain because it operates outside the bounds of natural law. The room was dead silent, except for the hum of electronics. I stood there, holding that microphone, trying to process what I'd just heard. An alien, an actual alien from another world, with technology beyond our understanding, with 50,000 years of scientific development, was telling me that science couldn't explain consciousness, that souls might be real, that the breath of God might be more than metaphor. Why are you telling us this? I finally asked. What do you get out of it? The professor set the tablet down gently. What do I get out of it? Nothing, Marcus Webb. I gain nothing. I remain in this cell regardless of what I tell you or do not tell you. I will die here, alone, never seeing my home world again, never hearing a response to the signals I send into the void. I translate these tablets not because I am forced to, but because I hope, foolishly, perhaps, that somewhere in these ancient texts there might be an answer, something the Anunnaki learned that my people missed, some insight that will finally solve the mystery that has consumed my entire civilization. He turned back to his work. But there is another reason I tell you these things, Marcus Webb. You lost your faith because you saw a child die and concluded that God does not exist or does not care. That is understandable. That is logical given your limited perspective. But I have seen 127 civilizations. I have studied consciousness across thousands of worlds, and I tell you this, the absence of intervention is not proof of absence. Perhaps God does not intervene because intervention would invalidate the very thing that makes consciousness meaningful: choice, free will, the ability to decide, to question, to grow. Perhaps suffering exists not because God is absent or cruel, but because a universe without suffering would be a universe without growth, without compassion, without love. He picked up his tools again. Or perhaps I am wrong. Perhaps consciousness is an accident, a glitch, a cosmic joke. Perhaps we are alone, And when we die, we simply cease. But I have spent 50,000 of your years searching for evidence of that conclusion, and I have found none. Only more mystery, only more questions, only more hints that there is something greater than us, something watching, something that breathed life into dead matter and said, "Be aware." The intercom clicked off. The professor returned to his work, those long fingers moving with impossible precision across the ancient clay. Dr. Chen and I stood there in the observation room, neither of us speaking. What was there to say? Finally, she broke the silence. "Go back to your quarters, Webb. Try to sleep. This is going to be a long assignment, and you need to pace yourself. Don't try to understand everything in one night. God knows I'm still trying, and I've been here for 3 years." I nodded, but I couldn't move, couldn't take my eyes off the professor. This being from the stars who was telling me, in his own alien way, that my grandmother might have been right, that there might be a plan, that consciousness might be a gift, not an accident, that souls might be real, and that the breath of God might be the one truth that science, for all its power, could never disprove. I finally left Sector 7A around 500 hours, went back to my quarters, lay down on my bed, and for the first time in 3 years, for the first time since that village in Afghanistan, I prayed, not out loud, just in my head, just a simple, "God, if you're there, if this is real, I need to know. Please, I need to know." I didn't get an answer, not that night, but something had changed. Some door in my mind that I'd welded shut had cracked open just slightly, just enough to let in the tiniest sliver of possibility, the possibility that I'd been wrong, that the universe was stranger and more mysterious than I'd allowed myself to believe, that maybe, just maybe, we weren't accidents stumbling through a meaningless void. Maybe we were something more, something that even aliens with 50,000 years of scientific advancement couldn't fully explain, something that looked a lot like a miracle. 3 weeks into the assignment, I'd settled into a rhythm. 0600 hours, report to Sector 7A, 1800 hours, end of shift. 12 hours a day watching the professor work, and work he did, constantly, without stopping. I'd watch him for my entire shift and never once see him eat, drink, or rest. Just those long fingers moving across clay tablets, making notes in that leather journal, occasionally consulting reference materials. Sometimes he'd work on the same tablet for days. Other times he'd finish one in hours and move to the next. Dr. Chen told me he'd been doing this for 6 years straight. 6 years in that cell, translating artifacts we'd recovered from dig sites across Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Egypt. The entire cradle of civilization, piece by piece, being reinterpreted by something that wasn't human. I tried not to think too hard about what that meant. About the fact that everything we thought we knew about our own history was potentially wrong. That every museum, every textbook, every archaeological paper might be based on mistranslations and misunderstandings. The professor knew the truth, and we were keeping him in a cell 7 floors underground, using his knowledge like we'd use a search engine. It didn't sit right with me. But then again, nothing about this place sat right with me. The observation room became my entire world. It was small, maybe 12 by 15 feet. One wall was the reinforced glass looking into the professor's cell. The other walls were covered with monitors, recording equipment, and filing cabinets full of Dr. Chen's translations and notes. There was a small desk where I'd sit for most of my shift, a coffee maker that I used way too much, and a mini fridge stocked with energy drinks and protein bars. The air had this recycled quality to it, like breathing inside a plastic bag. Every few hours I'd hear the ventilation system kick on with a low hum that you felt in your chest more than heard. It was the only sound besides the occasional scratch of the professor's tools against clay and the tap-tap-tap of Dr. Chen typing on her laptop. Days would go by where nobody spoke, where the only communication was the professor's written translations that he'd hold up to the glass for Dr. Chen to photograph. It was isolating in a way I hadn't experienced even in Afghanistan. At least there, you had your unit, people to talk to. Here, it was just me, Dr. Chen, who was lost in her work, and an alien who rarely spoke unless spoken to. I started understanding why the previous guards hadn't lasted. Around week 2, I started noticing patterns in the professor's behavior. Little things that you'd only catch if you were watching closely for hours on end. Like the way he'd pause sometimes, tools in hand, and just stare at the tablet. Not reading it, just staring. Like he was seeing something beyond the cuneiform text. or the way his fingers would occasionally tremble slightly when he was writing in his journal. Not a lot, just a barely perceptible shake, like someone fighting off tears or suppressing emotion. I didn't think aliens could cry. Hell, I didn't think they had emotions at all. But watching him, day after day, I started seeing things that looked a lot like human feelings. Frustration when a translation didn't make sense. Satisfaction when he figured out a particularly complex passage. And sometimes something that looked like profound sadness. It was in the way he'd set down his tools and place one hand against the glass, fingers spread, like he was reaching for something on the other side, like he was trying to touch a world he'd never see again. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't just some alien that had crashed and gotten captured. This was a person, a non-human person, but a person nonetheless. And he'd been alone in this cell for 6 years. One afternoon during week 3, Dr. Chen came into the observation room carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one and sat down next to me, both of us watching the professor work in silence for a few minutes. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "You've been wondering about the arrangement. I can tell." I looked at her. "Ma'am? The deal we have with him," she clarified. "Why he's here, why he cooperates. You haven't asked, but I know you've been thinking about it." She was right. I had been. Dr. Chen, he's been here for 6 years, in that cell, translating tablets 16 hours a day, and from what I can see, he never complains, never refuses, never causes problems. Why? If he's as intelligent as you say, he could probably figure out a way to escape, or at least to make demands. But he doesn't. Dr. Chen sipped her coffee. September 17, 1989. His ship crashed about 47 miles northwest of here. Groom Lake facility picked up the crash on radar, scrambled a recovery team. By the time they got there, the ship was, well, destroyed. Doesn't quite cover it. Imagine something traveling faster than anything humans have ever built, hitting the desert at an angle, skipping like a stone on water, and finally coming apart in a debris field stretching 3 miles. Most of it was vaporized on impact. What was left was pieces, fragments of technology we still don't understand. The recovery team found him about 200 yards from the main impact site, she continued. He'd been thrown clear, apparently. He was broken. That's the word they used in the reports. Broken. Multiple fractures, severe burns, massive internal trauma. They didn't think he'd survive the helicopter ride back to base, but he did. She paused. He survived because he wanted to survive. Because he knew that if he died, no one would ever know what happened to him. His people would never know. So he held on. For 3 days, he held on without medical care, without pain relief, without anything, while our doctors tried to figure out how to treat an alien physiology they'd never seen before. I thought about that. 3 days in agony, completely alone, surrounded by strange creatures that were probably terrifying to him, as he was to us. They eventually figured it out. Enough to stabilize him, Dr. Chen said. Enough to keep him alive. He healed slowly. Took almost 2 years before he could walk properly again. During that time, he learned English, learned to communicate, and he made a proposal. "The translation deal," I said. She nodded. He offered to share his knowledge in exchange for one thing, the ability to send messages home, to let his people know he survived, to tell them where he was, to ask for rescue. The government agreed, built him a transmitter to his specifications, gave him access to send signals into space, and in return, he translates anything we bring him. "Does it work?" I asked. "The transmitter?" Dr. Chen's expression darkened. "That's the thing, Webb. We don't know. He sends signals regularly, once every 73 hours like clockwork. The signals go out on frequencies we can barely detect, modulated in ways our best engineers don't understand. They're definitely being transmitted. We can confirm that much. But," she trailed off. "But what?" "But we've been monitoring for responses for 36 years. We've pointed every radio telescope we have at the region of space he says his homeworld is located. We've listened on every frequency we can access, and we've never, not once, detected anything that could be a response. No acknowledgement, no rescue mission, no communication of any kind." She looked at the professor through the glass. "I asked him about it once, about 3 years ago. I said, 'Professor, we haven't detected any responses to your signals. Do you think anyone is receiving them?' You know what he said?" I shook my head. He said, "I am aware, Dr. Chen. I have always been aware. The probability of successful reception after 47 light years through stellar radiation and cosmic interference is approximately 3.7%. The probability that my civilization still exists after the catastrophe that caused my vessel to crash is approximately 12%. The probability that they have maintained the capability and will to mount a rescue mission after 36 years is approximately 0.4%. I am, statistically speaking, already dead, but I send the signals anyway, because the alternative is accepting that truth, and I am not yet ready to accept that truth. The room felt colder suddenly. I looked at the professor with new eyes. He wasn't cooperating because he had to. He was cooperating because it gave him something to hold on to, a reason to keep existing. The translations were busy work, a way to pass the time while he sent signals into the void, knowing they'd probably never be answered, knowing he'd probably die in that cell, knowing he was, for all practical purposes, the last of his kind, at least from his perspective. Jesus Christ, I whispered. We're keeping him prisoner. No, Dr. Chen said firmly. We're giving him purpose. He told me that once too. He said that on his world, before the catastrophe, whatever that was. He was a scholar, a researcher studying ancient civilizations across the galaxy. This is what he did. This is what he loved. Finding lost knowledge, translating dead languages, piecing together the histories of species that no longer existed. In a way, we're letting him do what he was born to do. The fact that he's doing it in a cell instead of a university is unfortunate, but it's something. It's better than leaving him in a medical facility somewhere, being studied like a lab rat, serving no purpose except to exist. I wanted to argue with her, wanted to say that keeping any sentient being locked up was wrong regardless of the justification, but I couldn't, because when I looked at the professor, working away at those tablets with such focus and care, I realized she was right. This wasn't cruel and unusual punishment. This was a grief-stricken alien scholar, light years from home, probably the last survivor of his species, choosing to spend his remaining time doing the one thing that still gave his life meaning. We weren't his captors. We were his enablers, giving him tablets to translate, materials to work with, signals to send into the darkness. It was symbiotic in the saddest possible way. He needed us to give his existence purpose, and we needed him to unlock secrets that humanity would never discover on its own. How long will he live? I asked. Do we know? Dr. Chen shrugged. Based on our medical assessments, his physiology seems to age much slower than humans. He could live another 200 years, maybe more, or he could die tomorrow. We don't know enough about his species to predict longevity. 200 years. I tried to imagine spending 200 years in that cell, translating tablets, sending unanswered messages home, knowing you'd never be rescued, never see your world again, never hear your own language spoken by someone else. 200 years of solitude. It was almost too cruel to contemplate. That night, as my shift was ending, the professor did something he'd never done before. He stopped working right at 1800 hours, exactly when I was about to leave, and turned to face the observation window. He couldn't see me through the one-way glass, but he knew I was there. He always knew. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb. His voice came through the intercom. Dr. Chen had left an hour earlier, so it was just me. I grabbed the microphone. Yes, Professor? You have been observing me for 3 weeks. You have been contemplating the nature of my situation. You feel sympathy, perhaps guilt. You are wondering if your species is acting ethically by keeping me contained. He was right, of course. He was always right. Yeah, I said. I've been thinking about that. Your concern is noted and appreciated, the professor said. But it is misplaced. I am where I choose to be, doing what I choose to do. Your species has not imprisoned me. Circumstance has imprisoned me. Your species has merely given me the opportunity to make that imprisonment meaningful. There is a significant difference. He paused. In my culture, we have a saying that does not translate perfectly into English, but approximately means, purpose transforms suffering into service. I suffer from isolation, from loss, from the knowledge that I will likely die alone on a world not my own, but I serve by uncovering truth, by translating the observations of the Anunnaki, by helping your species understand where you came from. That service gives my suffering meaning. It transforms my tragedy into something useful. Professor, I said quietly, do you really think anyone's going to come for you? Do you really believe those signals are getting through? There was a long silence. Then, no, Marcus Webb. I do not believe anyone is coming. I do not believe the signals reach home. I do not even know if my home still exists. The catastrophe that caused my vessel to malfunction and crash, it was not an accident. It was an attack. My world was under siege when I departed. I have no logical reason to believe that anyone survived. My chest tightened. Then why do you keep sending the signals? Because hope is not logical, the professor replied. Hope is not based on probability or evidence or reason. Hope is the thing that conscious beings do when logic says there is no point in continuing. Your species understands this better than mine. We tried to eliminate hope through pure rationality, to make all decisions based on calculation and evidence. It made us efficient, but it made us less than what we could be. Your species, with all your flaws and contradictions, understands something we forgot, that meaning comes not from certainty, but from the choice to continue despite uncertainty. He placed his hand against the glass again, that gesture I'd seen him make when he thought no one was watching. I send signals because I choose to hope, because the alternative is despair, and despair serves no purpose. So I work, and I hope, and I wait, and perhaps that makes me a fool by my species' standards. But perhaps, his voice cracked slightly, that synthesized sound breaking in a way that sounded almost human. Perhaps your grandmother was right, Marcus Webb. Perhaps God does have a plan. Perhaps I am here, translating these tablets, precisely because I am meant to be here. Perhaps my crash was not random but purposeful. Perhaps I am the bridge between your species and truths you need to know. I do not have faith as you understand it, but I have something close to it. I have the choice to believe that my suffering has meaning. I stood there holding that microphone, feeling tears prick at my eyes for the first time in years. This alien, this being from the stars who'd lost everything, his home, his people, his freedom, was teaching me something my grandmother had tried to teach me my whole life. That faith isn't about having proof. It's about choosing meaning over meaninglessness, choosing hope over despair, choosing to believe that suffering can have purpose, even when you can't see it. Thank you, Professor, I managed to say. He tilted his head. For what, Marcus Webb? For reminding me that I have a choice, I said. For the past 3 years, I've chosen to believe that nothing matters, that we're just accidents stumbling through a meaningless universe. But that's a choice too, isn't it? Just like you choosing to send those signals. I can choose to believe that the universe is cold and empty, or I can choose to believe that maybe there's more to it than that. Maybe consciousness isn't an accident. Maybe that little girl in Afghanistan is somewhere somehow. Maybe my grandmother's prayers weren't just words disappearing into nothing. The professor was quiet for a moment. Then, I cannot tell you what to believe, Marcus Webb. I can only tell you what I have learned in my many years studying consciousness across the cosmos. Everywhere I look, I find the same mystery, the same impossible transformation of matter into mind, the same question that science cannot answer. And the more I study it, the more I am forced to conclude that perhaps the question itself is the answer. Perhaps we are meant to wonder. Perhaps the mystery is the evidence. Perhaps God is most clearly seen not in certainty, but in the beautiful, terrible, inexplicable miracle of being aware that we exist at all. He turned back to his work table. Your shift has ended, Marcus Webb. Go rest. Tomorrow I will show you something that the Anunnaki discovered. Something that will challenge you even more than what we have already discussed. Something that suggests your grandmother's faith was not misplaced. That there is indeed a watcher, and that the watcher knows each of us by name. The intercom clicked off. I stood there for another minute, watching him return to his work, those long fingers moving across ancient clay with reverence and care. Then I left Sector 7A and headed back to my quarters. But I didn't go to sleep, not right away. Instead, I sat on my bed, pulled out my phone, and opened the photos I hadn't looked at in 3 years. Pictures of my family. My grandmother at church, smiling that smile that said she knew something the rest of us didn't. My sister's kids, my niece and nephew, innocent and happy and unaware of how complicated the world really was. And I thought about the professor, alone in his cell, choosing hope despite having every logical reason to choose despair. If he could do that, if a being who'd lost his entire world could still believe that suffering had meaning, then maybe I could too. Maybe I could choose to believe that God was real, that consciousness was a gift, that souls existed, that the breath of life was exactly what my grandmother had always told me it was. Evidence of something greater, something that even aliens with 50,000 years of advancement couldn't fully explain, but could recognize when they saw it. The signature of the divine. Day 24 started like any other. I came into Sector 7A at 0600 hours, coffee in hand, ready for another 12-hour shift of watching the professor work in silence. Dr. Chen was already there, which wasn't unusual. Sometimes I think she slept in that observation room, if she slept at all. She looked up when I entered, gave me a tired nod, and went back to her laptop. The professor was at his work table as always, hunched over a new tablet they'd brought him the day before. This one was larger than most, maybe 2 feet across, covered in dense cuneiform text. I settled into my chair, took a sip of coffee, and prepared for another day of quiet observation. But about an hour into my shift, something changed. The professor stopped working. Just stopped. Set down his tools very carefully, very deliberately, and turned to face the observation window. Turned to face me. And even though that glass was one way, even though he couldn't possibly see me, his eyes locked onto mine with such precision that I felt it in my chest, like a physical impact, like being hit with something I couldn't see. Dr. Chen noticed immediately. She sat up straighter, her hands hovering over her keyboard. "Webb," she said quietly, "don't move, don't speak, just stay still." I didn't need to be told twice. There was something about the way the professor was looking at me, or through me, that made every instinct I had scream danger. Then I heard it, except I didn't hear it. It wasn't sound. It was, Jesus, how do I explain this? It was like someone putting thoughts directly into your head. Not your thoughts, someone else's thoughts. Clear and distinct and impossible to ignore. The voice, if you can call it that, was the professor's, but it didn't come through the speakers. It came from inside my skull. "You carry weight, Marcus Webb." Loss of faith? I literally jumped out of my chair, knocked my coffee over, sent it spilling across the desk. Dr. Chen was up instantly, grabbing my arm. "Webb, do not respond verbally. Do you understand me? Do not speak out loud." Her grip was tight, almost painful. "He's in your head right now. He can read your intentions, your surface thoughts. If you think something clearly enough, he'll receive it. But do not speak. It breaks the connection, and it disturbs him. Just think your response." My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might crack a rib. The professor was still staring at me, unmoving, those black eyes boring into me like drills. I forced myself to think clearly, to form coherent thoughts, instead of the panicked static that was flooding my brain. "How do you know that? How do you know I lost my faith?" The response came immediately. That same not voice, speaking directly into my mind. All the previous guardians carried something. Marcus Webb. The first carried guilt. He had ended a life in service to his country and could not reconcile the act with his moral beliefs. The second carried fear. Fear of inadequacy, fear of failure, fear that he was not enough. The third carried doubt. Doubt in his marriage, doubt in his choices, doubt in his path. But you, there was a pause, and I swear I felt something like sadness in that mental voice. You carry absence. The absence of belief. The absence of purpose. The absence of the faith structure that once gave your life meaning. And absence, Marcus Webb, is heavier than presence. Pain is heavy, yes, but the void left when pain removes something essential, that is heavier still. I stood there, trembling, feeling more exposed than I'd ever felt in my life. This thing, this being, was reading me like a book, seeing parts of me I'd buried so deep I'd almost forgotten they existed. "How are you doing this?" I thought at him. "How are you in my head?" The professor tilted his head. "Consciousness is not confined to the physical brain, Marcus Webb. I have told you this. Consciousness exists elsewhere, in a space that is not physical space. Your thoughts, your awareness, your sense of self, these things broadcast on frequencies that most of your species cannot detect, but my species can. We evolved this capability over millennia of living in hive collective structure before we developed individual consciousness. The ability remained even after we became individual. I can perceive the electromagnetic patterns of your thoughts. I can translate them to meaning. It is not magic. It is merely a sense possessed, like echolocation your dolphin or electromagnetic sensing shark. Dr. Chen had let go of me, standing close, her face pale. I realized this was the first time she'd witnessed this. The first time she'd seen the professor make telepathic contact with a guardian. She looked terrified and fascinated in equal measure. "What do you want from me?" I thought at the professor. "Why are you doing this now? You've been here for 24 days and you've never—" "Because you are ready," the professor interrupted. The others were not ready. The first guardian was too fragile. Telepathic contact would have shattered what remained of his stability. The second was too hostile. He would have interpreted the connection as an attack and responded with violence. The third was too closed. His mind was like a fortress, and I respected his walls. But you, Marcus Webb, you are open, wounded, but open, questioning, seeking. You do not know it yet, but you are searching for something to replace what you lost in Afghanistan. You are searching for a reason to believe again. He was right. God help me, he was right. For 3 years I'd been telling myself I was fine, that I'd moved on, that I'd accepted the universe was cold and empty and meaningless, but I hadn't accepted it. I'd just been waiting for something to prove me wrong, waiting for some sign that my grandmother hadn't been deluded, that the little girl in Afghanistan was more than just atoms returning to the earth, that consciousness was more than just a complicated chemical reaction. I want to show you something, the professor's voice echoed in my head. Something the Anunnaki discovered, something that changed their understanding of reality, something that suggests your loss of faith may have been premature. But I must warn you, Marcus Webb, once I show you this, once you see what they saw, you cannot unsee it. It will fundamentally alter your perception of existence. You will carry this knowledge for the rest of your life. Are you prepared for that burden? I thought about the previous guardians, the one who had a nervous breakdown, the one who tried to take photos and disappeared, the one who left crying, saying he couldn't look his children in the eye if he stayed. They'd all seen something, learned something, and it had broken them in different ways. Was I ready for that? Was I willing to risk my sanity for the possibility, just the possibility, that there might be more to existence than what I could see and measure and prove? I looked at Dr. Chen. She was watching me intently, and I could see the question in her eyes. She'd been there for 3 years, and she'd never been offered this. The professor had never made telepathic contact with her, never offered to show her whatever it was he was about to show me. Why? Why me, and not her? As if reading my thought, and he probably was, the professor's voice came again. Doctor, Chen is brilliant, but she seeks academic knowledge, intellectual understanding. She wants to know how things work. You, Marcus Webb, want to know why things work. You want meaning, not mechanism. What I am about to show you will not answer how consciousness began. It will only deepen the mystery of why. Dr. Chen would find this frustrating. You will find it illuminating. I took a deep breath, made my decision. Show me, I thought at him. Whatever it is, show me. I need to know. The professor moved closer to the glass, closer than I'd ever seen him come. His hand pressed against it, those 3 long fingers splayed out. Place your hand against the glass, Marcus Webb. Mirror my gesture. Dr. Chen grabbed my arm again. Webb, I don't know if this is safe. We've never done this before. We don't know what... It's okay, Dr. Chen, I said out loud, breaking the telepathic connection for a moment. I need to do this. I need to know what he's been trying to tell us. I walked up to the glass. The professor was right there, just inches away, separated only by 3 inches of reinforced material. Up close, I could see details I'd missed before. The way his skin had this faint iridescence to it, like pearl. The way his eyes weren't just black but contained subtle movements like watching the night sky and seeing stars shift. The way he looked, old, not aged, but ancient, like something that had seen empires rise and fall, galaxies born and die. I raised my hand and placed it against the glass, matching his gesture. Pinky, where his 3rd finger was, thumb where his 1st finger was, palm flat against the cold surface. The moment our hands aligned, even with the glass between us, everything changed. The room disappeared. Dr. Chen disappeared. The observation equipment, the desk, the coffee-stained papers, the fluorescent lights, gone. I was standing in darkness, complete, absolute darkness. Not the darkness of a room with the lights off, the darkness of deep space, the darkness of the void before creation. I could feel my body, could feel my heart hammering in my chest, but I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything except my own breathing. Then, in that darkness, something ignited, a single point of light, distant, impossibly bright, and I knew, somehow I knew that I was watching something that had happened 200,000 years ago. I was seeing what the Anunnaki had seen, what every advanced civilization in the universe had witnessed on their own worlds. The moment when consciousness began, the light grew, spread, branched out like lightning through the darkness. And I realized I wasn't seeing physical light. I was seeing awareness, spreading through a species, through early humans, through minds that had been simple, animal, concerned only with survival, suddenly becoming complex, self-reflective, asking why, asking how, asking who they were and why they existed. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, like watching a fire spread through a forest or a sunrise breaking over a frozen landscape. The transformation was sudden, violent almost in its intensity. One moment there were just animals. The next moment there were people, conscious, aware, questioning people. And in that transformation, I saw something else. Something the professor wanted me to see. Behind the light, behind the spreading awareness, there was a presence, not a being, not a thing you could point to or measure or photograph, but a presence nonetheless, like standing in an empty room and knowing, absolutely knowing, that you're not alone, that something is watching you with interest and intent. The Anunnaki had felt it too. I could sense their terror and awe in the memory. They'd been observing Earth, documenting the evolution of primates, expecting a gradual development over millions of years. Instead, they'd witnessed this ignition, this impossible transformation, and they'd felt that presence, that watcher, that force that reached into physical reality and changed it in ways that violated everything they understood about natural law. And they'd known, with absolute certainty, that they were witnessing something sacred, something divine, the breath of God made visible. Week 7. I'd recovered from the vision, mostly. The professor had released the telepathic connection after showing me that moment of ignition, and I'd collapsed against the observation window, gasping like I'd been underwater. Dr. Chen had helped me to a chair, brought me water, asked if I needed medical attention. I'd waved her off. How do you explain to a doctor that you just witnessed the birth of human consciousness through an alien's telepathic memory? How do you describe seeing the presence of God without sounding completely insane? You don't. You just drink the water, take some deep breaths, and try to process what you've experienced. The professor hadn't contacted me telepathically since then. He'd gone back to his work like nothing had happened, but something had changed between us. I could feel it, an understanding, an acknowledgement. He'd shown me what he'd promised to show me, and now it was up to me to decide what to do with that knowledge. For the first time in 3 years, I found myself praying regularly. Not long prayers, not elaborate ones, just simple conversations with whoever was listening. God, if that was real, if that was you I felt behind that light, I need to know what to do with this. I need to understand. No burning bushes, no voice from heaven, but a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. A sense that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't talking to empty air. Then on day 47 of my assignment, Dr. Chen came into the observation room carrying something different. Usually the tablets were brought in sealed containers by security personnel, logged, photographed, and then passed through a special airlock into the professor's cell. But this time, Dr. Chen was carrying it herself, and she had this look on her face. Excitement mixed with apprehension, like someone who'd just found a winning lottery ticket but wasn't sure if it was real. "Webb, we need the professor to look at this immediately," she said, moving to the airlock controls. "This just came in from a dig site that's been closed to the public for 8 years. Tel al-Mukayyar, ancient Ur. The team found a chamber that wasn't on any archaeological survey. It was sealed behind a false wall in what we thought was a storage room." She held up the tablet. Even through the protective case, I could see it was different from the others. Older, the clay was darker, almost black, and the cuneiform was carved deeper, more deliberately. The dating puts this at approximately 2600 BCE, same period as the other Anunnaki texts. But Webb, she looked at me with wide eyes. The seal on that chamber, the symbol carved into the door. It wasn't Sumerian, it wasn't Akkadian or Babylonian or any Mesopotamian culture we know. The professor saw the photographs we sent and he requested this tablet specifically, said it was urgent. That's never happened before. He's never requested anything. Dr. Chen passed the tablet through the airlock. I watched through the glass as the professor approached it slowly, almost cautiously, like it might explode. He reached out with those long fingers, touched the surface, and froze. Just completely froze. For a solid 30 seconds he didn't move, didn't breathe, if he even breathed. Just stood there with his hand on the tablet, those black eyes fixed on the cuneiform text. "Professor," Dr. Chen spoke into the microphone, "can you confirm receipt of artifact UR 2016-47B? No response. The professor's hand was trembling now, actually trembling. In 7 weeks, I'd never seen him show that much physical reaction to anything. "Professor," Dr. Chen tried again, more urgently, "are you able to proceed with translation?" The professor slowly picked up the tablet, held it with both hands, and turned to face the observation window. When he spoke, it wasn't through telepathy. It was out loud, physical sound coming through the speakers, and I realized with a shock that this was the first time I'd heard his actual voice. Not the filtered, synthesized version that usually came through the intercom, and not the thought voice of telepathy. His real voice sounded like, God, how do I describe it? Like glass scraping against stone, like wind through a canyon, like something that wasn't meant to make sounds in human hearing range but was forcing itself to do so anyway. It hurt to listen to, made my teeth ache. This, he said, each word seeming to cause him physical effort. This, I did not expect to find. Dr. Chen leaned forward. What is it, Professor? Is it another Anunnaki text? The professor's head tilted, that black gaze fixed on the tablet in his hands. It is about Anunnaki, yes, but it is not written by Anunnaki. It is written by those who came before Anunnaki, those who were here first. The temperature in the observation room seemed to drop about 10 degrees. Dr. Chen's face went pale. Before the Anunnaki? Professor, the Anunnaki are described in every text as the first ones, the original observers, the ancient ones who descended from the heavens. How can there be a before? The professor set the tablet down on his work table with infinite care, like it was made of dynamite instead of clay. The Anunnaki arrived at Earth approximately 445,000 years ago, according to your archaeological consensus based on Sumerian texts. This is correct. They were the first extraterrestrial civilization to establish permanent observation stations on your world. But he paused, and I swear I heard something like fear in that scraping glass voice. They were not the first conscious beings to walk this planet. They found evidence of another presence, evidence that someone, or something, had been here long before them, had observed the formation of life on Earth, had perhaps, he stopped, those long fingers hovering over the tablet's surface, had perhaps initiated that formation. I found my voice. Professor, what are you saying? Are you talking about an even older alien civilization? The professor turned to look at me directly. No, Marcus Webb. I am talking about the architects, the watchers, the first cause. His hand touched the tablet again, tracing the unfamiliar symbols. In all my years studying ancient civilizations across the galaxy, in all the texts my people have translated, in all the archaeological records we have compiled, there are hints, whispers, references to something that came before everything else, a presence that existed before the first stars formed, before the first galaxies coalesced, before time itself began. The Anunnaki called them the Ilu-Gig, the watchers from the highest place. They feared them, revered them, spent centuries trying to find evidence of them. He looked at Dr. Chen. This tablet is that evidence. This tablet describes an encounter between an Anunnaki expedition leader and something they found in a cave system beneath what is now the Persian Gulf. Something that should not exist. Something that could not exist according to any known physical law. Something that spoke to them without sound, that showed them visions without images, that existed in multiple places simultaneously. Something that told them. The professor's voice cracked, that glass scraping sound breaking into something almost like static. Something that told them why consciousness exists, why the universe bothers to know itself, why suffering and death and love and hope all serve a purpose. The Anunnaki who witnessed this encounter went mad. 3 of them died. The 4th lived long enough to create this tablet, to record what they had learned, and then sealed it away with instructions that it should never be opened unless humanity reached the threshold of understanding. The threshold where they could comprehend the truth without being destroyed by it. Dr. Chen was gripping the edge of her desk so hard her knuckles were white. Professor, what did the Anunnaki learn? What's on that tablet? The professor looked at her, then at me, and in those depthless black eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. Hope. Real, genuine hope. They learned that we are not accidents, Dr. Chen. None of us. Not humans. Not Anunnaki. Not my people. Not any of the 128 conscious civilizations we have encountered. We are, he paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper through the speakers. We are part of a design, a purpose, an experiment in what happens when the infinite tries to experience itself through the finite, when God, if that is the word you prefer, when God tries to know himself through beings that can choose, can question, can love, can suffer, can doubt, can have faith, the watcher, the architect, the first cause, whatever name you give it. It spoke to the Anunnaki in that cave. It told them that consciousness is not a byproduct of evolution. It is the entire point of the universe. Matter exists so that it can become aware. Awareness exists so that it can recognize itself as part of something greater. Suffering exists so that joy has meaning. Death exists so that life has value. Choice exists so that love is possible. Free will exists so that faith is necessary. And all of it, all of the pain and beauty and terror and wonder of existence, all of it serves a single purpose.
He placed both hands on the tablet, and I could see them shaking. To allow the infinite to experience what it is like to be finite. To allow the eternal to experience what it is like to grow, to learn, to struggle, to overcome. To allow God to know himself through us. We are not separate from the divine, Marcus Webb. We are how the divine experiences reality.
Every conscious being in the universe is a fragment of God, sent out to live and learn and eventually return with the knowledge of what it means to exist. Your grandmother was right. God does have a plan. And that plan is you, is me, is every conscious being that has ever lived or ever will live. We are God learning what it means to be God. 3 days. The professor worked on that single tablet for 3 solid days, and it was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. In the 7 weeks I'd been watching him, I'd never seen him spend more than 18 hours on a single artifact. He was efficient, methodical, almost mechanical in the way he processed information. But this tablet broke his pattern. He'd start translating, those long fingers tracing the cuneiform symbols, making notes in his journal with that precise handwriting. Then he'd stop, just stop completely, set down his tools, place both hands flat on the work table, and stare at the tablet like it had personally offended him. Sometimes he'd stay like that for hours, not moving, not working, just staring. Dr. Chen tried to maintain her professional detachment, but even she was getting anxious. "This isn't normal behavior," she muttered on day 2, watching him through the glass. "He's never been like this. Never." I'd noticed something else too, something that made my skin crawl. The professor's hands were shaking, not all the time, but whenever he touched that tablet, whenever he read certain passages, his fingers would develop this slight tremor, like someone trying to hold something too heavy, like someone being forced to confront something they'd rather not face. And a being that had witnessed civilizations rise and fall, that had traveled between stars, that had 50,000 years of accumulated knowledge. What could possibly disturb him that much? On day 3, Dr. Chen tried to get an update. She activated the intercom and said, "Professor, we need a status report on artifact UR 2016-47B. Can you provide a preliminary translation?" Nothing. He didn't even acknowledge that she'd spoken. Just kept staring at that tablet, hands trembling slightly. "Professor," she tried again, more firmly. "Command is requesting progress updates. I need to give them something. Can you at least tell me what's causing the delay?" Still nothing. It was like he couldn't hear her, or like he was hearing something else entirely. Something in that cuneiform text that was drowning out everything else. Dr. Chen looked at me, genuine concern in her eyes. "Webb, in 3 years I've never seen him refuse to communicate. He's always been cooperative. Always. She trailed off, but I knew what she was thinking. This is bad. This is really bad." I stood up and walked to the glass. The professor was close to it, maybe 10 feet away, still hunched over that tablet at his work table. "Professor," I said, not bothering with the intercom. I knew he could sense me even without it. "What's on that tablet? What did you find?" His head tilted slightly, not turning to look at me, but acknowledging my presence. "Progress. Talk to me," I pressed. "You showed me the vision. You showed me the moment of ignition. You told me consciousness was a gift. So what's on this tablet that's got you so spooked?" For a long moment, nothing. Then quietly, through the speakers, "It describes the price, Marcus Webb, the cost of the gift. Day 4. I came in at 0600 to find Dr. Chen already there, looking like she hadn't left. Coffee cups everywhere, her eyes bloodshot. The professor was in the exact same position he'd been in when I left the night before. Same posture, same trembling hands on the tablet. "Has he moved at all?" I asked. Dr. Chen shook her head. "Not in 8 hours. Webb, I think we need to call this in. Get a medical team down here. This isn't normal. He might be having some kind of, I don't know, neurological event. Psychological break? We don't know enough about his physiology to... The intercom crackled to life, cutting her off. The professor's voice, that glass-scraping sound that made my teeth hurt. I need to verify something. With the Guardian. Dr. Chen grabbed the microphone. Professor, thank God. Yes, whatever you need. What kind of verification? Do you need additional reference materials? Access to the database? No, the professor said. I need to speak with Marcus Webb, directly, in person. The room went silent. Dr. Chen looked at me like he just suggested I juggle live grenades. Professor, you know the protocols. No direct contact. The observation window is for safety purposes. We can't... I am not asking permission, Dr. Chen, the professor interrupted, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Desperation. I need to verify that humans still possess what this tablet describes. I need to confirm that the capacity still exists, and I cannot do that through glass and speakers and telepathic impressions. I need face-to-face interaction. He turned to look at the observation window, those black eyes finding me despite the one-way glass. Please. Dr. Chen was already shaking her head. Absolutely not. Webb, don't even think about it. We have no idea what he's capable of physically. He's been cooperative for 6 years, yes, but we don't know his strength, his speed, He's not going to hurt me, I said quietly. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. The professor had shown me the birth of consciousness, had shared memories of his lost world, had spent weeks teaching me, in his own way, about the nature of existence. Whatever he needed to verify, it wasn't through violence. Webb, I can't authorize this, Dr. Chen said. If something happens to you, then it happens, I said. Dr. Chen, he said, please. In all the reports you've shown me, in all the documentation from 6 years of his captivity, has he ever said please? Has he ever asked for anything? She stared at me. We both knew the answer. The professor demanded nothing, requested nothing, simply existed and cooperated because he had no other choice. But now he was asking, begging almost. That meant something. That meant whatever was on that tablet was important enough to break every behavioral pattern he'd established. I need to know what he's found, I said. I need to know why he's been staring at that tablet for 3 days. And if going in there is what it takes. I walked to the airlock door. Dr. Chen grabbed my arm. Marcus, please think about this. You have no combat training for something like him. No weapons. No backup. If he decides to, he won't, I said with more confidence than I felt. Trust me. Or trust him. Either way, I'm going in. The airlock procedure took 3 minutes. 3 minutes of standing in a small chamber while air pressures equalized, while decontamination protocols ran, while I questioned every decision that had led me to this moment. The inner door opened with a hiss, and I stepped into the professor's cell for the first time. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not bad exactly, just alien. Like ozone mixed with something metallic and something organic I couldn't identify. The second thing was the temperature. It was cold in there, really cold, maybe 50 degrees. The professor stood near his work table, maybe 15 feet away, that tablet in his hands. Up close, without glass between us, he was even more imposing than I'd realized. 8 feet tall, easy, maybe more. Those black eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my fight or flight instinct scream to run, but I held my ground. Marcus Webb, he said, and hearing that voice without electronic mediation was surreal, like listening to something not meant for human ears. Thank you for coming. I know this violates your protocols. I know this frightens you, but I need to understand something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. What do you need to understand? The professor set the tablet down on the work table, but he didn't take his eyes off me. This tablet describes what the Watcher, the architect, told the Anunnaki in that cave. It describes the mechanism by which consciousness connects to the divine, the way that fragments of God experience physical reality. He paused. But it also describes something else, something that only your species possesses, something that my people lost millennia ago, something that the Anunnaki never had. What is it? I asked. The professor moved closer, not threatening, but deliberate. The Watcher told the Anunnaki that humanity was special among all conscious species, that you were given a gift that made you different, dangerous even. He tilted his head. The gift of faith without proof, the ability to believe in God, even when God is silent, even when God does not intervene, even when suffering seems meaningless and death seems final, the ability to love the divine, even when the divine appears absent. The Anunnaki could not comprehend this. They were scientists, observers, rational beings. They could accept evidence of God, but they could not have faith. My people are the same. We have data that suggests a creator, but we cannot believe in the way humans believe. He was close now, maybe 5 feet away. And you, Marcus Webb, you lost your faith when a child died. You concluded that God was either non-existent or cruel. That is logical. That is rational. That is exactly what my people would conclude. But this tablet says that humans possess the ability to choose faith even after loss, even after trauma, even after witnessing the worst that existence has to offer. You can choose to believe that suffering has meaning, even when you cannot see that meaning. You can choose to trust in a plan you cannot understand. You can choose love over logic. Those black eyes seem to look right through me. So I need to know, Marcus Webb. I need to verify what this tablet claims. After everything you have experienced, after everything I have shown you, after all the evidence and data and visions, can you still choose faith? Not because of what you know, but despite what you know. Can you look at this universe with all its pain and beauty and mystery and choose to believe that God loves you? That is what I need to understand. Because if humans have truly lost that gift, if you have become like us, rational, logical, unable to believe without proof, then this tablet suggests that humanity's purpose is complete, that the experiment is over, that the divine has finished learning what it needed to learn through your species. I stood there in that freezing cell, 5 feet from an 8-foot alien who was asking me the most important question anyone had ever asked me. Can you still choose faith? Can you believe in God's love despite everything? The professor's black eyes were fixed on me, waiting, and I could feel Dr. Chen watching through the observation window, probably terrified I was about to get torn apart. But I wasn't afraid, not anymore, because in that moment, I realized something. The professor wasn't testing me. He was hoping, desperately hoping that I'd say yes, that I'd prove the tablet was right, that humanity still possessed this gift that his species had lost. And the weight of that hope, God, the weight of it was almost crushing. I thought about Afghanistan, about that little girl's pink shoe in the dust, about 3 years of telling myself that God was dead or never existed, about my grandmother's voice saying, God has a plan for you, baby, about the vision the professor had shown me, that moment of ignition when consciousness bloomed across early humanity like fire, about everything I'd learned in the past 7 weeks, all the evidence, all the data, all the scientific impossibilities that pointed towards something greater. And I realized that the professor was right. I had a choice. I could look at all of that and conclude that it was just interesting phenomena with no deeper meaning. Or I could choose to believe that it meant something, that I meant something, that the little girl meant something. Yeah, I said quietly. Yeah, I can still choose faith. The professor tilted his head. Even after the child's death, even after witnessing suffering that seemed purposeless. Especially after that, I said, and I was surprised by how true it felt. Professor, you told me that suffering exists, so joy has meaning, that death exists, so life has value, that choice exists, so love is possible. If God intervened every time something bad was about to happen, we wouldn't have free will. We'd be puppets. Safe puppets maybe, but puppets nonetheless. And love from a puppet isn't real love. Faith from someone who's been given proof isn't real faith. I took a step closer to him. That little girl in Afghanistan, her death broke me. I won't lie about that. But you know what? Her life mattered. The fact that she smiled at me, that she trusted me enough to ask for water, that for just a moment there was kindness between two strangers in a war zone, that mattered. And if consciousness is really what you say it is, if we're really fragments of God experiencing reality, then she's not gone. She's somewhere. That awareness, that soul, that spark of the divine that made her her. It didn't just evaporate. Energy doesn't disappear, right? It transforms. Maybe consciousness is the same. Maybe she transformed into something I can't see or measure or prove. But I can choose to believe that. I can choose faith over despair. And you know what? That choice feels more powerful than any proof ever could. The professor stood absolutely still. Then, slowly, he sank down to his knees. This 8-foot being, this ancient consciousness from the stars, lowered himself to my eye level. And for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something unmistakable in those black eyes. Tears. Not human tears. There was no water, no visible moisture, but something was happening. His eyes were shifting, becoming less opaque, like clouds clearing. "You still have it," he whispered, that glass-scraping voice barely audible. "After everything, after all the logic and reason and evidence that should make faith obsolete, you still have it. The ability to choose love over logic, to choose hope over probability, to choose belief over proof." He placed one long hand over his chest, over where his heart would be if he had one in the same place as humans. "We lost this, Marcus Webb. My people lost it approximately 32,000 years ago by your calendar. We became too advanced, too knowledgeable. We learned so much about how the universe works that we forgot how to simply believe in why it works. We can analyze consciousness, but we cannot have faith. We can study the divine, but we cannot love the divine. We became observers instead of participants, rational instead of faithful. And in doing so, we lost something essential, something that this tablet says is the entire point." He looked down at his hands. The Watcher told the Anunnaki that faith is the bridge, the connection between the finite and the infinite, that knowing God is nothing compared to loving God. That proof makes faith unnecessary, and without faith, the divine cannot experience the most beautiful thing existence has to offer, the choice to believe despite doubt, to love despite pain, to trust despite fear. "Is that why you're here?" I asked. "Why your ship crashed? Were you looking for faith?" The professor made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "Hard to tell. I was part of an expedition, Marcus Webb. We were searching for species that still possessed what we had lost, the ability to believe without proof. We had studied 127 civilizations. Some had never developed faith at all. Others had lost it as they advanced, just as we did. But the Anunnaki records suggested that humanity was different, that you were given this gift in abundance, that even after millennia of scientific advancement, you would retain the capacity for irrational, beautiful, powerful faith." He stood back up, towering over me again. "My ship was damaged by spatial anomaly, random quantum fluctuation, 1 in trillion probability. I crashed here, survived, and have spent 6 years translating texts about the very thing I came to find. The irony is profound." He walked back to the work table, picked up the tablet. This text describes the final message the Watcher gave to the Anunnaki. After explaining the mechanism of consciousness, after revealing that all aware beings are fragments of the divine experiencing reality, after describing faith as the bridge, the Watcher said one more thing, something that the Anunnaki found terrifying, but that I find hopeful. "What did it say?" I asked. The professor held up the tablet. It said, "The species that retains faith longest will be the species through which I learn the most. The species that can love me even when I am silent will be the species that teaches me what unconditional love truly means. Guard them, protect them, for they carry a gift more precious than all the knowledge in the universe. They carry the ability to see me not through evidence, but through choice, and that choice is the most sacred thing existence offers." The observation room intercom crackled, Dr. Chen's voice shaking slightly. "Professor, are you saying that the Watcher, that God, asked the Anunnaki to protect humanity? To guard us?" "Yes," the professor said. "The Anunnaki were tasked with observing your species, documenting your development, and intervening only when absolutely necessary to prevent complete extinction. They did not create you. They did not manipulate your evolution. They were guardians, protectors, ensuring that the species with the strongest gift of faith survived long enough to fulfill its purpose." He set the tablet down gently. "And when the Anunnaki eventually left Earth approximately 2,000 years ago by your calendar, they passed that guardianship to others, to other observers, other watchers. Some you might call angels, some you might call spirits, some you might not have words for. But the protection continues, because humanity's gift is too precious to lose. Your ability to have faith, to choose love, to believe in God despite every logical reason not to. That is why the universe bothers to exist at all. That is the experiment. That is the purpose. You are teaching God what it means to love unconditionally, what it means to have faith when faith should be impossible, what it means to choose hope in the face of despair." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "We're teaching God?" "Yes," the professor said simply. "God is infinite, but not experiential. God is eternal, but not temporal. God is all-knowing, but cannot know what it is like to not know. cannot experience doubt, cannot experience the act of choosing to believe despite uncertainty. That is what consciousness provides. That is what you provide. Every time you choose faith, every time you choose love, every time you choose to believe that your suffering has meaning, you are showing God something he cannot experience directly. You are the bridge between the infinite and the finite. You are how God learns what it means to be human. The cell was silent, except for the hum of ventilation. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Dr. Chen was crying in the observation room. I could see her through the glass, tears streaming down her face as she recorded everything. The professor looked at me with those eyes that were no longer entirely black. So you see, Marcus Webb, why your answer mattered so much. If humanity has lost the gift of faith, if you have become like us, rational, logical, unable to believe without proof, then the experiment is complete. God has learned all he can learn from your species. But if you can still choose faith, he moved closer to me, placed one long hand on my shoulder. The touch was cold, but not unpleasant. If you can still look at a universe filled with suffering and death and uncertainty and choose to believe that God loves you anyway, then humanity's purpose continues. Then there is still value in your existence. Then there is still hope that the divine will learn the most important lesson of all, that love is meaningless without choice, and faith is meaningless without doubt, and that the greatest act of love in all of existence is choosing to believe in God, even when God gives you every reason not to. He removed his hand. Thank you, Marcus Webb. Thank you for proving that the gift still exists. Thank you for showing me that faith is not dead. Thank you for reminding me why I spent 50,000 years searching for something I could not name. I was searching for you, for humans who can still choose love over logic, for beings who can still see the divine not through evidence, but through hope. You have answered a question my entire civilization has been asking for millennia, and the answer is yes. Faith still exists. God can still be loved without proof. The experiment continues. And that, his voice cracked again, that glass scraping sound breaking into something almost musical. That is the most beautiful thing I have learned in my entire existence. I stood there in that cell, trying to process what the professor had just told me, that my choice to believe mattered, that faith was the whole point, that I was teaching God something. It felt too big, too important, like suddenly discovering you're a main character in a story you thought you were just an extra in. The professor returned to his work table, his movements slower now, less agitated. Whatever he'd needed to verify, I'd apparently verified it. He picked up his journal, that leather-bound book filled with his precise mechanical handwriting, and opened it to a marked page. Marcus Webb, Dr. Chen. What I am about to tell you is the culmination of 50,000 years of research by my species. It is the reason we developed faster than light travel, the reason we mapped the galaxy, the reason we have spent millennia studying primitive worlds and cataloging the development of conscious life. We were searching for an answer to a question that haunts every intelligent species that has ever existed. He paused. Where does consciousness come from? Dr. Chen leaned forward in the observation room, her voice coming through the intercom. Professor, we've discussed this. You've told us consciousness can't be explained by material processes alone, that it appears to exist outside physical space-time, but you've never told us the full scope of your research. How many species have you studied? How consistent is the pattern? The professor set down his journal and looked up at the observation window. My people have made contact with 128 conscious civilizations across this galaxy. We have archaeological records of 47 additional civilizations that went extinct before we could reach them. In total, we have comprehensive data on 175 species that developed self-awareness, abstract reasoning, and the ability to contemplate their own existence. He moved to a clear section of wall in his cell and, using what looked like a piece of charcoal, began drawing. Every single one, Marcus Webb, every single one experienced what we call the touch, what the Anunnaki called Zi-Gal, what you call the breath of God. A moment in their evolutionary history where consciousness appeared suddenly, dramatically, impossibly, not gradually over millions of years as biological evolution would predict, but rapidly, within a handful of generations, sometimes within a single generation. He drew a timeline, marking points along it. For my species, it occurred 50,000 years ago. We were tool users, had basic language, lived in social groups. Then, across our entire planet, over the span of approximately 30 years, something changed. Our ancestors began asking why, began creating art not for function, but for beauty, began burying our dead with ceremony, began looking at the stars and wondering what they were, began developing philosophy, religion, mathematics. The archaeological record shows this transformation occurring simultaneously across 7 separate continents on our world. No contact between the populations, no way for ideas to spread, yet all of them experienced the touch at the same time. You're saying it wasn't cultural evolution, Dr. Chen said. Cultural innovations can spread through contact, through trade, through conquest. But if it happened simultaneously across isolated populations, then it was not cultural, the professor finished. It was something else. Something that affected the entire species at once, regardless of location or circumstance. He added more marks to his timeline. The Anunnaki documented the touch occurring on Earth approximately 200,000 years ago. Homo sapiens had existed as a biological species for perhaps 100,000 years before that. Anatomically modern humans with large brains, complex tool use, social structures. But something was missing. Then suddenly, cave art, burial rituals, jewelry, musical instruments, evidence of abstract thought and symbolic reasoning appearing in the archaeological record across Africa, Asia, and Europe within a 5,000-year window. Geologically speaking, that is instantaneous. He turned to look at me. And here is what truly disturbs us, Marcus Webb. Here is what has driven my people to search the cosmos for 50 millennia. Every species we have studied experienced the touch at a similar stage of development. Not when they first evolved large brains. Not when they first developed language or tools. But at a very specific threshold, when the biological substrate was ready. When the brain had evolved sufficient complexity to host something more than mere animal awareness. That is when the touch occurred. That is when consciousness was introduced. I felt a chill run down my spine. Introduced from where? The professor drew a symbol on the wall. It looked almost like an eye, but not quite. More abstract. We do not know, Marcus Webb. That is the horror and the wonder of it. We have instruments that can detect gravitational waves from colliding black holes billions of light years away. We can measure quantum fluctuations at the Planck scale. We can map the cosmic microwave background radiation from the moment after the Big Bang. But we cannot detect the source of consciousness. We cannot find where it comes from or how it enters biological systems. It simply appears. When the conditions are right, when the brain reaches sufficient complexity, consciousness ignites, like a candle being lit by an invisible flame. Dr. Chen was typing frantically, recording everything. Professor, are you saying consciousness is transmitted? Like a signal, like information being broadcast from somewhere? Perhaps, the professor said. Or perhaps consciousness is not transmitted but awakened. Perhaps it exists as a fundamental field of reality, like gravity or electromagnetism, but one we cannot directly measure. Perhaps sufficiently complex biological systems tap into this field, become receivers for something that was always there but never expressed before. The Anunnaki theorized that consciousness might be a property of the universe itself, that awareness might be woven into the fabric of space-time at a level we cannot access technologically. He paused. But that theory does not explain the pattern, Dr. Chen. It does not explain why the touch occurs simultaneously across isolated populations. It does not explain why it happens so suddenly. It does not explain why every species experiences it at approximately the same stage of neurological development. Unless, Dr. Chen said slowly, unless someone is deliberately causing it, unless there's an intelligence monitoring biological evolution across the galaxy and activating consciousness when species reach the right stage. The professor made that sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Now you understand, Dr. Chen. Now you see why this has haunted my people for 50,000 years. Because that is the only explanation that fits the data. That somewhere, somehow, there is a consciousness vastly greater than our own. A consciousness that monitors the evolution of biological life across billions of worlds. A consciousness that decides when a species is ready to wake up. And when that moment arrives, it reaches into physical reality and performs what can only be described as a miracle. It transforms animals into people, transforms biological machines into self-aware beings, transforms matter into mind. He turned to face me directly. You call this consciousness God, Marcus Webb. The Anunnaki called it the Watcher. My people call it the First Cause. The Hindus called it Brahman. The Buddhists call it the Dharmakaya. Every conscious species in the universe has a name for it, because every conscious species has encountered it at the moment of their own awakening. We all carry the memory of the touch in our deepest myths and religions. We all remember, even if we do not consciously know we remember, the moment when we stopped being animals and became something more. The moment when God breathed awareness into our ancestors and said, "Be conscious of your consciousness. Be aware that you are aware. And in that awareness, know me." He placed his hand against the wall, over the symbol he'd drawn. This is what the tablet describes, Marcus Webb. This is what the Watcher told the Anunnaki in that cave beneath the Persian Gulf. That consciousness is not an accident, not an emergent property of complex systems, not a lucky break in the evolutionary lottery. Consciousness is a gift, deliberately given, carefully timed, universally distributed. And the species that can still recognize that gift as a gift, that can still feel gratitude for the miracle of awareness, that can still choose faith in the giver, even when the giver remains hidden, those species are fulfilling the purpose for which consciousness exists in the first place. To allow the infinite to experience itself through the finite, to allow God to know what it means to doubt, to struggle, to choose, to love, to believe. You are not here by accident, Marcus Webb. None of us are. We are here because something greater than us wanted us to be here, wanted us to be aware, wanted us to be able to look at the stars and ask why, instead of just what. The professor stood there, hand still pressed against the symbol he'd drawn on the wall, and I could see something in his posture I'd never seen before. Defeat. Not the defeat of someone who'd lost a battle, but the defeat of someone who'd spent a lifetime searching for something and finally realized it could never be found. Not through science, anyway. Not through knowledge. Not through all the technology and wisdom and accumulated understanding of 50,000 years. "Professor," I said quietly, "you've shown me the pattern. You've explained that 175 species all experience the touch. That consciousness appears to be deliberately introduced. That there's a watcher, a first cause, something that activates awareness across the universe. So why does this terrify you? Shouldn't this be, I don't know, comforting, knowing that there's a purpose behind it all?" The professor turned to face me, and those eyes that had been clearing were dark again, not with malice or anger, with something that looked almost like grief. "It terrifies me, Marcus Webb, because we cannot prove it, cannot measure it, cannot detect it with any instrument we possess. My species has spent 50,000 years developing technology that can manipulate space-time, that can harvest energy from quantum vacuum fluctuations, that can compute probabilities across infinite parallel timelines. We have become masters of the physical universe. We understand gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, quantum entanglement, dimensional resonance. We have built machines that can simulate entire galaxies. We have mapped the cosmic web across billions of light years." He moved closer to me, and his voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And yet we cannot answer the simplest question. Why am I aware that I exist? We can describe the neurological correlates of consciousness. We can map every synapse, every electrical impulse, every chemical reaction in a brain, but we cannot find the observer, cannot locate the I that experiences all of this. It is the one question that science cannot answer. The one mystery that gets deeper the more we investigate it. But you have evidence," Dr. Chen said through the intercom. "The pattern you've described. 175 species all experiencing the touch at the same stage of development. That's empirical data. That's science pointing directly at an intelligent cause." "Yes," the professor said, and there was such sadness in that synthesized voice. "Science points at it, points towards something beyond the physical. But science cannot grasp it, cannot explain the mechanism, cannot provide equations or models or testable predictions. We know that consciousness is introduced from outside normal space-time. We know that it violates every principle of materialism. We know that it suggests an intelligence vastly greater than our own, operating on principles we cannot comprehend. But knowing that it exists and understanding how it works are two entirely different things." He walked back to his work table, picked up that ancient tablet with trembling hands. "We have visited 89 inhabited worlds, Marcus Webb. Civilizations at various stages of development. primitive tribes who had barely discovered fire, advanced societies approaching our own level of technology, everything in between, and every single one, regardless of their level of scientific sophistication, had creation myths. Stories of how consciousness came to be. Stories of gods or spirits or cosmic forces that breathed awareness into their ancestors. Some of the stories were beautiful, some were terrifying, but all of them described the same fundamental truth, that consciousness did not evolve naturally, but was given as a gift by something greater. He set the tablet down carefully. The primitive societies accepted these myths as literal truth. The advanced societies dismissed them as superstitious metaphors. But we, Marcus Webb, we who have studied the actual data, who have mapped the pattern across hundreds of worlds, who have seen the evidence that science cannot explain, we know that the myths are more accurate than the skeptics realize. The primitives were right. Consciousness was given, but they were right through faith, not through proof. And that is what haunts us. I still don't understand why that's terrifying, I said. If the evidence supports the existence of God, of a creator, of a first cause, isn't that what every species is searching for? The answer to why we exist? The professor looked at me, and I finally understood what I was seeing in those alien eyes. It wasn't just grief, it was envy. Deep, painful, aching envy. Because you can still believe without proof, Marcus Webb. You can look at the evidence and have faith that fills in the gaps. You can accept mystery as part of the answer rather than demanding complete understanding. But my people, he paused, and when he continued, his voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear it. We lost that ability approximately 32,000 years ago. We became so advanced, so knowledgeable, so dependent on empirical verification that we lost the capacity for faith. We can see the evidence pointing toward God, but we cannot believe in God without complete proof. And complete proof would negate faith, would negate choice, would negate the very thing that makes consciousness meaningful. We have trapped ourselves, Marcus Webb, trapped ourselves in a prison of our own intelligence. We know too much to believe in simple materialism, but we cannot know enough to abandon faith for certainty. We exist in a state of perpetual agnosticism, acknowledging that something greater must exist, but unable to love it, unable to worship it, unable to have a relationship with it. He pressed both hands against the glass separating us. And do you know what the cruelest irony is? The more intelligent a species becomes, the more likely they are to lose faith. Of the 89 civilizations we visited, the primitive ones had vibrant religious traditions. They prayed, they built temples, they lived in relationship with the divine, even if their understanding was limited. But the advanced civilizations, the ones approaching our level of development, almost all of them had abandoned religion, dismissed it as superstition, replaced faith with science. And in doing so, they lost something precious. They lost the ability to experience the very thing that consciousness was designed for, relationship with the Creator. I thought about that, about how, in my grandmother's generation, church was the center of community life. Everyone had faith, or at least paid lip service to it. But in my generation, how many of my friends believed in God? How many of them went to church? How many of them would choose faith over science when the two seemed to conflict? The professor was right. The more educated we became, the more we understood about biology and chemistry and physics, the more we dismissed the idea of God as primitive thinking. We were following the same path his species had followed, trading faith for knowledge, and according to him, that trade was a mistake, a devastating mistake. But humans still have it, Dr. Chen said, her voice thick with emotion. I could see through the observation window that she was crying. We still have the capacity for faith. Marcus just proved that. Even after losing a child, even after questioning everything, he can still choose to believe. Doesn't that give you hope? The professor turned to look at her, and something changed in his expression. Something softened. Yes, Dr. Chen, it gives me hope. More hope than I have had in, I cannot even calculate how long. Because if humanity can retain faith even as you advance technologically, if you can balance knowledge with belief, if you can be intelligent without becoming arrogant, then perhaps there is a path my people did not see. Perhaps it is possible to have both, to understand the universe scientifically, while still maintaining the humility to accept mystery, to know how things work, while still wondering why they work, to be advanced without losing the ability to be amazed. He looked down at the tablet again. This text, this message from the Watcher that the Anunnaki recorded, It offers me something I thought was lost forever. It offers me vicarious faith. I cannot believe for myself, but I can witness your belief. I can document it. I can learn from it. And perhaps, in some small way, I can remember what my people lost. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. And perhaps I can envy you for still having it. The room was silent except for the sound of Dr. Chen crying and the hum of the ventilation system. I stood there, 5 feet from an alien who'd traveled between stars, who possessed knowledge and technology beyond human comprehension, who'd lived through things I couldn't imagine. And he was envious of me, of my ability to believe in something I couldn't prove, of my capacity to have faith. It was the most humbling moment of my entire life. "Professor," I said quietly, "what's the final message? The last thing the Watcher told the Anunnaki? You said this tablet contains their encounter in the cave. What did the Watcher say?" The professor picked up the tablet one last time, held it reverently, like it was the most precious thing in existence. Then he began to read, translating the ancient cuneiform into English as he went. The Anunnaki expedition leader, whose name translates approximately as "he who records truth," wrote, "We came seeking answers. We came with instruments to measure, with mathematics to calculate, with knowledge accumulated over 12,000 cycles. We came as scientists, as observers, as rational beings determined to understand the mechanism of consciousness. And the Watcher showed us that we were asking the wrong question." He paused, his fingers tracing the ancient symbols. "The Watcher did not tell us how consciousness works, did not provide equations or models or scientific explanations. Instead, the Watcher asked us, does a child need to understand the biology of love to love their mother? Does a flower need to understand photosynthesis to grow toward the sun? Does your heart need to understand the physics of blood flow to beat? Some things are meant to be experienced, not explained. Some mysteries are meant to be lived, not solved. And consciousness, awareness, the miracle of being, this is the greatest mystery of all. Not meant to be understood, but to be grateful for." The professor's voice grew softer as he continued translating. Then the Watcher showed us the touch as it happened on hundreds of worlds, showed us the moment when animals became people, when instinct became thought, when existence became experience. And we asked, from where does this gift come? The Watcher said, it comes from the place without place, the source before source, the cause of all causes. It does not come from the stars, though I made the stars. It does not come from the earth, though I formed the earth. It does not come from any location you can point to or any dimension you can measure, because it comes from me. And I am not a location or a dimension. I am the foundation upon which reality rests. I am the consciousness that dreams the universe into being. I am the question asking itself. I am the answer seeking understanding. I am the infinite trying to experience the finite. And you, all of you, every conscious being that has ever existed or will ever exist, you are my way of knowing what it means to not be me. The professor set the tablet down with infinite care. His hands were shaking badly now. That is what the Anunnaki learned, Marcus Webb. That is what drove 3 of them mad and left the 4th broken enough to seal this knowledge away for thousands of years. Not because it was terrifying in a horrible way, but because it was terrifying in a wonderful way. Because it meant that every conscious being in the universe is sacred, is divine, is literally a fragment of God experiencing reality. It meant that when you suffer, God suffers. When you love, God loves. When you choose faith despite doubt, God experiences what it means to believe. You are not separate from the divine. You are the divine, temporarily forgetting your true nature so that you can rediscover it, so that you can choose to return home, so that you can experience the journey of consciousness from ignorance to awareness to transcendence. He looked at me with those eyes that were no longer entirely black, that seemed to contain stars and sadness and hope all at once. And that is why I envy you, Marcus Webb, because you can still feel that connection, can still choose faith, can still love God without needing to understand God. You have what my people lost. You have the gift of accepting mystery, of being comfortable with not knowing, of believing that the universe is more than just mathematics and physics. And that gift, that precious, irreplaceable gift, that is what makes you human. That is what makes your species special among all the species we have encountered. Not your intelligence, not your technology, not your potential, your faith, your stubborn, beautiful, irrational faith in something greater than yourselves. Hold on to that, Marcus Webb. Never let it go, because if humanity loses that gift, if you become like us, you will have all the knowledge in the universe and none of the wisdom. You will understand how everything works and forget why anything matters. And that his voice broke completely, that synthesized sound fragmenting into static and silence. That is a fate worse than death. That is the real extinction, not of body, but of soul. I left Sector 7A that night around 2100 hours. Dr. Chen had wanted to debrief, to process everything the professor had said, to discuss the implications of what we'd learned. But I couldn't. I was too full, too overwhelmed, like trying to pour an ocean into a cup. I needed space, needed quiet, needed to be alone with thoughts that were too big for my skull. The walk back to my quarters felt longer than usual. The hallways of Level B7 were nearly empty at that hour, just the occasional night shift personnel moving between sectors. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody spoke. That was the culture down here. Everyone had their secrets, their classified projects, their pieces of impossible truth that they carried alone. I wondered how many of them had seen things like I'd seen, how many of them had talked to beings from other worlds, how many of them had their entire understanding of reality dismantled and rebuilt in the span of 8 weeks, probably more than I'd think. This place, Area 51, Dreamland, whatever you wanted to call it, it was where the impossible became classified, where the things that couldn't exist were studied by people who'd signed their lives away to never speak about them. I was one of them now, part of the secret, part of the lie we told the world so they could keep living in a simpler reality, a reality where humans were alone in the universe, where consciousness was just brain chemistry, where God was a comforting myth for the simple-minded. But I knew better now, and that knowledge weighed heavier than any weapon I'd ever carried. When I got to my quarters, I just stood there for a minute with my hand on the door handle. On the other side of that door was my life, my bed, my laptop with photos of family I hadn't talked to in months, my Bible that I'd brought from home but hadn't opened in 3 years, sitting on the shelf gathering dust, my routine, my patterns, my carefully constructed existence as someone who didn't believe in anything he couldn't see or touch or prove. But that person didn't exist anymore. He died somewhere between watching an alien show me the birth of consciousness and listening to that same alien confess that his entire civilization envied humanity's capacity for faith. I wasn't the same Marcus Webb who'd walked into Sector 7A 8 weeks ago. That Marcus was angry, bitter, convinced that God was either absent or cruel. This Marcus knew things, knew that 175 species across the galaxy had all experienced the same impossible moment of ignition, knew that consciousness couldn't be explained by science, no matter how advanced, knew that every civilization that had ever existed had myths of creation that were more accurate than their skeptics realized, knew that somewhere, somehow, there was a watcher, an architect, a first cause, something that breathed awareness into matter and said, "Be conscious." And that something my grandmother had called God, it was real, not provable, not measurable, not detectable by any instrument humanity or any other species had ever built, but real nonetheless. Real in the way that love is real, in the way that beauty is real, in the way that meaning is real. Not physical, but no less true for being non-physical. I opened the door, went inside, sat on the edge of my bed, and for the first time in 6 years, 6 years since that village in Afghanistan, since that little girl's shoe lying in the dust, since I'd decided that God was dead or never existed, I got down on my knees. It felt awkward, foreign, like trying to speak a language I'd forgotten. My knees hit the cold floor and I just stayed there, hands folded, head down, not sure what to say or how to say it. The elaborate prayers of my childhood felt wrong, felt performative, felt like trying to impress someone who already knew every thought in my head. So I didn't use elaborate words, didn't quote scripture, didn't try to sound holy or righteous or worthy. I just spoke, simple, honest, raw. God, I don't know if you're listening. I don't know if you care. I don't know if you're even there, or if I'm just talking to myself in an empty room. But the professor, he showed me things, told me things that make me think I was wrong, that I've been wrong for 6 years. I blamed you for that little girl dying, blamed you for not intervening, for not stopping it, for letting something so horrible happen to someone so innocent. And I used that as an excuse to walk away, to stop believing, to stop praying, to stop caring. My voice cracked. But maybe I was looking at it wrong. Maybe intervention would have taken away the choice, the free will, the thing that makes love real and faith meaningful. Maybe you were there. Maybe you grieved with me. Maybe you felt what I felt. Maybe, I paused, the words catching in my throat. Maybe that little girl isn't gone. Maybe consciousness doesn't die. Maybe she's somewhere I can't see or measure or prove, but somewhere nonetheless. I wiped my eyes. When had I started crying? I don't understand it, God. I don't understand why consciousness exists or how it works or why suffering has to be part of the equation. The professor said his people spent 50,000 years trying to figure it out and they couldn't. They're smarter than us, more advanced. They've mapped the galaxy and they still don't have answers. Just more questions. Just more evidence that points at you but can't prove you. And maybe that's the point. Maybe you're not supposed to be provable. Maybe faith only means something if it's a choice, if it's a leap into the unknown. If it's believing despite doubt, loving despite pain, trusting despite fear. I took a deep breath. I was wrong, God. I was wrong to walk away. Wrong to blame you. Wrong to think that the absence of intervention meant the absence of love. The professor said, consciousness is how you experience what it means to not be you. That we're fragments of the divine learning what it means to be finite, to struggle, to choose, to grow. And if that's true, if we're really part of you, experiencing reality on your behalf, then you felt that little girl die. You felt my pain. You feel everything we feel because you're not separate from us. You're experiencing life through us. The words came faster now, like a dam breaking. I don't need proof anymore, God. I don't need miracles or signs or burning bushes. I just need to know that this means something, that my life means something, that consciousness isn't an accident, that we're here for a reason. And the professor? He crossed the galaxy and spent 6 years in a cell and translated ancient tablets from beings who witnessed the birth of humanity, all to tell me what my grandmother tried to tell me when I was 6 years old, that you have a plan, that we're not accidents, that the universe isn't cold and empty and meaningless, that love is real and souls are real and faith is real. I paused. So here I am, kneeling on a floor 7 stories underground in a facility that doesn't officially exist, talking to a God I can't prove is listening, and I'm choosing faith. Not because I have evidence, though the professor gave me more evidence than most people ever get, but because the alternative is unbearable. The alternative is believing that consciousness is an accident, that suffering is meaningless, that we're just complicated meat machines stumbling through a random universe until we stop. And I can't live like that anymore. I tried. For 6 years I tried, and it was the darkest, emptiest, most hopeless 6 years of my life. Then I felt it. Not a voice, not a vision, not anything I could describe to someone who hadn't experienced it, but a presence. Like the room suddenly wasn't empty anymore, like I wasn't alone. It was similar to what I'd felt when the professor communicated telepathically, that sense of another consciousness touching yours, but different, warmer, infinitely warmer. The professor's touch had been cold, analytical, alien. This was home. That's the only word I have for it. It felt like coming home after being lost for years. It felt like being known, completely, totally, absolutely known. Every thought I'd ever had, every mistake I'd ever made, every doubt and fear and shameful thing I'd tried to hide from myself. It was all visible, all seen. And instead of judgment or condemnation or disgust, there was just love, unconditional, overwhelming, impossible love. Love that made no logical sense. Love that I hadn't earned and couldn't deserve. Love that existed simply because I existed, because I was conscious, because I was a fragment of the divine experiencing reality, because I was, in some way I couldn't fully comprehend, part of God experiencing what it meant to be Marcus Webb from Chattanooga, Tennessee. A kid who'd lost his faith in a desert on the other side of the world and found it again in a basement 7 floors underground while talking to an alien. I don't know how long I stayed there on my knees. Could have been 5 minutes. Could have been an hour. Time felt different, stretched out and compressed simultaneously. But when I finally stood up, my knees aching from the cold floor, something had changed. Some weight I'd been carrying for 6 years had lifted, not completely. The memory of that little girl still hurt, probably always would, but now the hurt meant something. Now it was part of a larger story, a story about consciousness and choice and love and faith, a story where suffering wasn't meaningless, but a necessary part of growth, where death wasn't an ending, but a transformation, where God wasn't absent, but closer than breath, experiencing everything we experienced, feeling everything we felt, present in every moment of joy and every moment of pain, not as an observer, but as a participant, as us. I slept better that night than I had in years. No nightmares about Afghanistan. No waking up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing. Just deep, dreamless sleep. The sleep of someone who'd finally found an answer to a question that had been eating at them for years. Not a complete answer, not a logical answer, but an answer nonetheless. When I reported to Sector 7A the next morning at 0600 hours, Dr. Chen was waiting for me with red eyes. She'd been crying again. "Webb," she said quietly. "The professor was transferred last night, 2300 hours. They came with a security team, sedated him, and took him. Wouldn't tell me where, wouldn't tell me why. Just said the project was being relocated to another facility." My stomach dropped. "What? Why? We were making progress. He just finished translating the most important artifact we've ever recovered." "I know," Dr. Chen said. "I filed protests, called everyone I could reach. But it's above my clearance level, above yours too. Someone higher up decided he needed to be moved, and that was that." She handed me a piece of paper. "He left this for you, slipped it through the meal slot before they sedated him." The paper was covered in that precise mechanical handwriting I'd come to recognize, the professor's writing. It said, "Guardian Marcus Webb, thank you for showing me that mystery is not a failure of knowledge, but the signature of the architect. Your species is blessed to still be able to feel this. Do not lose it. Do not let advancement steal your capacity for wonder. Do not let knowledge replace wisdom. The universe needs species who can still choose faith, who can still love without proof, who can still see the divine in the gaps between what we know. My people lost this gift. We became so intelligent that we forgot how to be amazed. You have shown me that this need not be humanity's fate, that it is possible to know much and still believe more. Guard this gift, Marcus Webb. It is more precious than all the technology my people have ever developed. It is the thing that makes consciousness worth having. With gratitude and hope, the professor, whose name in my language means, he who seeks what cannot be found but must be searched for anyway." I read it 3 times, felt tears building again, but didn't try to stop them. Dr. Chen put a hand on my shoulder. "He changed you, didn't he? Changed both of us." "Yeah," I said. "He did." "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "Your assignment here is technically complete. The primary subject has been relocated. You'll probably get reassigned to regular security detail, back to the normal world, back to pretending you never saw any of this." I folded the paper carefully and put it in my pocket. "I don't know, Dr. Chen. I don't know if I can go back to pretending. Not after this. Not after learning what I've learned." She smiled sadly. "None of us can, Webb. That's the price of knowledge. Once you know, you can't unknow. Once you've seen behind the curtain, you can't forget what's there. We just have to decide what to do with what we know, how to live with it, how to make it mean something." "The professor said humanity is blessed," I said. "Said we still have the gift of faith, that we can still choose to believe despite doubt. That makes us special among all the species in the universe. Do you believe that?" Dr. Chen asked. I thought about it, about everything I'd seen and learned, about the pattern across 175 species, about consciousness appearing like magic when brains reached sufficient complexity, about the watcher in the cave telling the Anunnaki that awareness was a gift, not an accident, about the professor's envy when I told him I could still choose faith, about the presence I'd felt last night while kneeling on my floor, about my grandmother's voice saying, "God has a plan for you, baby." "Yeah," I said, "I believe it, not because I can prove it, but because the alternative is unbearable, and because sometimes the things that can't be proven are the truest things of all. So here's what I want you to understand, what I need you to hear. I spent 8 weeks talking to an alien who had 50,000 years of scientific advancement behind him, who had studied 175 conscious civilizations across the galaxy, who had translated texts from beings who witnessed the birth of human consciousness. And you know what he taught me? He taught me what my grandmother tried to teach me when I was 6 years old, that some things don't need to be understood to be true, that mystery isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature, that consciousness isn't an accident, it's a miracle, that we're not alone in an indifferent universe, we're fragments of something infinite experiencing what it means to be finite, that suffering isn't meaningless, it's the contrast that makes joy possible, that death isn't the end, It's a transformation. That God isn't absent, He's closer than breath. That faith isn't weakness, it's the strongest thing humans possess. The thing that makes us special among all species. The thing that allows the divine to experience doubt and still choose love, to face uncertainty and still choose trust, to witness suffering and still choose hope. An alien with technology that could manipulate space-time envied me, envied my ability to believe without proof, envied my capacity to choose faith despite logic, envied my species for not losing what his people lost when they became too smart for wonder. And that envy taught me something crucial. Intelligence without wisdom is hollow. Knowledge without meaning is empty. Understanding how everything works without wondering why anything matters is the real tragedy, the real extinction, not of body, but of soul. So if you're listening to this and you've lost your faith, if you've experienced something that made you question whether God exists or cares, if you've decided that science has disproven religion and that consciousness is just brain chemistry and that we're just accidents in a random universe, I want you to consider something. Consider that maybe you're looking in the wrong place. You're looking for proof, for evidence, for measurable, testable, repeatable demonstrations of the divine. But what if God isn't found in the things we can prove? What if God is found in the things we can't explain? In the gaps between neurons where consciousness somehow emerges? In the moment 200,000 years ago when animals suddenly became people and started asking why? In the pattern across 175 worlds where awareness ignites like fire when brains reach a certain complexity? In the fact that you're aware and science has no explanation for how matter becomes mind? In the love that makes no logical sense but feels more real than anything physical? In the meaning that shouldn't exist in a purely material universe but does anyway? In the hope that persists despite every reason for despair? That's where God is. Not in the answers, but in the questions. Not in what we know, but in what we wonder. Not in the proof, but in the mystery that makes us keep searching. The professor called it the signature of the architect, the evidence that consciousness was designed, not evolved. The fingerprint of something greater than us, woven into the fabric of awareness itself. And once you see it, once you really see it, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to thinking we're alone. Can't go back to believing that this is all accident and coincidence. Can't go back to the cold comfort of materialism. Because the evidence is there. Not proof, never proof, but evidence. Patterns, hints, whispers of something beyond the physical. Something that 175 species all recognized in their own ways. Something that even atheist aliens acknowledge exists, even if they've lost the ability to love it. My grandmother used to say, "God has a plan for you, baby." I thought she was naive. Thought she was clinging to comforting lies because the truth was too harsh. But she wasn't naive. She was wise. Wiser than an alien with 50,000 years of scientific knowledge. Because she understood something that advanced civilizations forget. That the point isn't to understand God. The point is to love God. To have faith in God, to trust God even when He's silent, especially when He's silent, because that's when faith means something. That's when it's a real choice. That's when it transforms from intellectual assent into genuine relationship. The professor said consciousness exists so the infinite can experience what it means to be finite, so God can know what it means to doubt and choose faith anyway, to suffer and choose hope anyway, to face death and choose love anyway. We're not separate from God. We're how God experiences reality. Every conscious being is a fragment of the divine, temporarily forgetting its true nature so it can rediscover it. So it can make the journey from ignorance to awareness, to transcendence, from animal to person to something more. And that journey, that beautiful, terrible, impossible journey of consciousness, that's what we're here for. Not to understand how it works, but to live it, to experience it, to choose meaning despite meaninglessness. To choose faith despite doubt, to choose love despite pain. That's the gift. That's what makes us human. That's what makes consciousness worth having. An alien who traveled between stars, who possessed knowledge beyond our comprehension, who'd spent 6 years translating the deepest mysteries of existence. He looked at me and said, "I envy you, not because I was smarter or stronger or better, but because I could still choose faith, could still accept mystery, could still love God without needing to understand God." And that's what I want to leave you with. If you've lost your faith, maybe you're looking for the wrong thing. Stop looking for proof. Start looking for the gap where proof ends and wonder begins. Stop demanding that God explain himself. Start accepting that some questions are meant to be lived with, not answered. Stop treating mystery as a problem to solve. Start seeing it as an invitation to experience something greater than logic can contain. The professor is gone now, transferred to some facility I'll never see, continuing his search for something that can't be found, but must be searched for anyway. And I'm back in the world, carrying knowledge I can never speak about, having witnessed things I can never fully explain. But I'm different now. The anger is gone. The bitterness is gone. The certainty that God is absent or cruel is gone, replaced by something simpler and stronger and more real. Faith, not because I have proof, but because I've seen the evidence, the pattern, the fingerprint, the signature of the architect written into consciousness itself. And because an alien with 50,000 years of advancement told me that the ability to choose faith without proof is the most precious gift in the universe, the thing his people lost, the thing humanity still has, the thing we need to guard with our lives. Because if we lose it, if we become too smart for wonder, too knowledgeable for mystery, too advanced for faith, we'll have all the answers and none of the meaning. We'll understand everything and matter nothing. We'll solve every mystery except the only one that matters, why we're conscious at all. So choose faith, not blind faith, not stupid faith, but chosen faith. Faith that acknowledges the evidence, accepts the mystery, and loves the God who hides in the gaps between what we know. Because that's where he's always been. Not in the answers we've found, but in the questions we keep asking. Not in what we can prove, but in what we choose to believe anyway. My grandmother was right. God does have a plan, and that plan is you, is me, is every conscious being learning what it means to be aware, learning what it means to doubt and choose trust, to suffer and choose hope, to face the void and choose meaning. That's the plan. That's the purpose. That's why we're here. Not by accident. By design. And if you can still feel that, if you can still choose to believe it despite every logical reason not to, then you have what 175 species across the galaxy either lost or never had. You have the gift of faith. Use it. Guard it. Never let it go. Because an alien who'd seen everything told me it was worth more than all the knowledge in the universe. And I believe him.